Prologue. Stop those motherfucking dogs or I'm getting out my shotgun. Xander's father bellowed through the house. Had he not been drunk and sitting in his recliner, Xander would have been preparing himself for a smack or a punch, or on a really bad day, a kick. But since his father was more screaming than anything else, he felt less afraid for himself and more for the dogs. Xander ran into the living room to answer his father. For some reason, it was acceptable for his father to bark orders from all over the place, but Xander needed to respond in close proximity or face a beating for being disrespectful. He'd learned a long time ago some things were not worth pushing back against. I'll take care of Boxer and Stray. Those dogs need to learn to be quiet. A man can't think around here. At least his dad was calm, or calmer than Xander was expecting given his earlier threat to put down the dogs. It wasn't a threat as much as a promise. Xander had lost more than one pet to his father's wrath. If it were up to him, they wouldn't have gotten Boxer and Stray at all. It wasn't fair to the dogs. They weren't allowed inside. Their only purpose was to be silent unless they were catching one of the many invisible, non-existent enemies his father was sure would arrive any day. But the dogs had shown up one day as pups. They were in a box on the porch, and his mother had begged to keep them. His father, as cruel as he was, had a soft spot for the boy's mother. Xander missed her so much. Cancer stole her before his 5th birthday. And now it was just him and his father. I will work on that, father. Never dad or daddy or even sir. Father was the only acceptable way to address the man. The boy ran out to find the dogs, whose barks had carried farther in the distance. He ran toward them, his breath starting to become labored by the time he finally found them on the border of their property, both dogs standing side by side. The neighbor had an electric fence and they stood a foot from it. Smart dogs. But he'd known that. They had lasted twice as long as any that came before them. Stop, he shouted at them. Come. They stopped barking briefly, looked him in the eye, and began to bark again. Xander closed the distance between them, wishing he had their leashes. It would be a long way back holding on to their collars, but whatever had them so riled up wasn't going away fast enough for the boy's liking. He was only a step from Boxer when a small branch rustled on the ground beside him and caught his eye. He knelt down to see a rabbit with red on his fur. He was still breathing, but the poor thing was very injured. Next to him, Xander saw the evidence that had him putting the pieces together. Fox print. The kind thing would be to put the injured creature down, but Xander's life had seen too much of that. His father loved that shotgun and took some sick pleasure in using it to kill innocent animals. No, Xander needed to save this little one. He took off his hoodie, glad the dogs had been too distracted by the fox to make the injuries on the rabbit any worse than they already were. Chances were the furry being wasn't going to see the morning, but it wouldn't be for lack of trying. Xander gently lifted the bunny, placing him on his warm sweatshirt, cooing that it would be all right. He held the bundled animal to his chest as he took him to the one person who might be able to help, Angeline Jackson. Chapter 1. August. How did you manage all this? I asked my grandmother for the 1000th time. She didn't answer. She would never be able to answer again, slowly slipping from this world a month earlier while she slept. That never stopped me from asking her questions or telling her about my day. This place was her. When I'd gotten the call from my uncle, telling me her wish was for me to take up residence here, it made sense. I'd been the grandson who spent their summers here, helping with her rescue farm and giving my parents the freedom to pretend they didn't have a son to bog down their fun. I knew the place better than most people. I just wished she had told me. I hadn't been married to my apartment back in the city. Shit, I didn't even really like it much. But it had been home since I graduated from college, and going from city life to country life had been a challenge I probably could have succeeded better at if I had eased my way into it. Not that I was staying. Probably. Most likely. Maybe. Shit, I didn't even know. Giving up the only place that ever felt like home was hard. All of this was hard. Especially the part about my grandmother being gone. At least my job allowed me to walk away until things with the estate were settled. I worked in real estate. Technically, I was an agent, but my job had morphed into a behind-the-scenes guy, putting up listings and optimizing searches so our company had better sales, that kind of thing. I like the steady income of that versus the highs and lows of showing and selling homes. Eat what you kill was a hard way to live. For me, anyway. My boss had been great about letting me work remotely. My work had grown the agency significantly since I first proposed it a couple years ago, sick of the rat race and without a degree that meant anything. Why I thought getting a major in English was a good idea I'd never know. I stepped out of the house and onto the porch, carrying a bowl of water for the three-legged cat that had taken up roost there. I tried to bring him in at least 50 times since I arrived, but he snuck back there to sit on the porch, watching the driveway when he wasn't sleeping. My gut told me he was waiting for my Grams to come home, and I got it. There was a time or two when I looked to the driveway with the same longing. Here you go, Lux. Grams had named him that, saying that after being found in the blue freestanding mailbox in town, he was now living the life of luxury. A fresh bowl for you. I'm not even going to pretend to bring you inside. I placed the water on the tray, swapping it out for the bowl I had placed there that morning and dumping its content over the rail and onto the azalea bush. Lux bounced over, rubbed against my foot, and then began lapping at the water. He was gorgeous, all calico with a tad of white on his nose. I felt bad he was still in mourning, but there was not much I could do about it except love on him and hope he got over it. I already had half a notion he'd be coming back to the city with me. It was selfish. I knew this. He liked the fresh air, not a tiny apartment. I'm going to leave the door ajar, just in case you change your mind. I walked back inside with the empty dish, leaving the door cracked open for him. I had a lot of animals to think about. My grandmother's heart of gold meant she had more rescue animals than she probably should have, not because the farm was too small, because it was plenty big enough, but it had taken her all day to mind them. Although, as my uncle reminded me, that was the life she had wanted. Gods, I missed her. A knock on the door startled me, especially as the pounding of feet began to accompany it. A young boy, 10 possibly 12, stopped dead in his tracks. You aren't Miss Angeline. He stood there, his hoodie in a bunch in his arms as if he were carrying something fragile inside it, and Lux was rubbing his leg. Interesting. Lux, I need to find your mama. The boy talked to the cat as if they were best friends. And given the little meow he gave him in return, it wasn't the first time. No one told you? Shit. I was gonna have to tell the kid my Gram was dead. About? He took a slight step back as if he were getting ready to bolt. I hardly considered myself scary. I was tall, sure, but my scraggly self posed a danger to no one. But he didn't know that. He was just a kid. Angeline was my grandmother, I offered, attempting to put him at ease. The entire situation was bizarre, but then again, my grandmother had always said she collected strays. Maybe he was one of them. I had half a memory of her talking about a boy who helped her around the barn from time to time. I had assumed a teenager, but maybe this was him. Was? His face dropped at the realization of the power in that one little word. She passed away last month. I lurched forward, immediately reaching for him when it looked like he was going to drop the bundle in his arms. But his grip actually tightened. Whatever he was holding was important. No one told me. Tears began to flow down his cheeks. No one told me. I wanted to comfort the boy and tell him everything would be okay. Instead, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I embraced my inner grandma and turned toward the stove, grabbing the tea kettle. Want to put your hoodie on the counter, and I can make some tea? Tea had been Grams's solution to all the wrongs in this world. She even had different types for different woes. It's not my hoodie. He bit his lip, the tears still on his cheeks. He'd not loosened his hold long enough to wipe them. I mean, it is, but it's more than that. I thought Angeline could help. His words confused me, but his tone told me to keep listening. Why didn't anyone tell me? I had no answer to that. He'd obviously loved her or at least trusted her with whatever the catalyst for him being there was. He should have been told. I don't know. I filled the pot and waited for him to say something. Anything. He did not. I'm August. I set the kettle on the burner and turned it on. I'm staying here for a while. Like the month? He quirked his eyebrow. It wasn't the first time someone questioned my name. Adults tended to wait until an appropriate time, but kids always blurted it out. and I appreciated that. Probably. I shrugged. I was born in August. My mom thought it would be an adorable story. She swore she would not be pregnant in August, so when I was born on August 1st, what else could she name me or some shit? The story changed with her audience. That was how she was. Clever. I held up a box of strawberry tea. Grams had said strawberry brought smiles. He gave me a nod of approval, and I took out 2 bags, placing them in the mugs permanently residing on the drain board. My Grams would not have been impressed with that. I'm Xander. I live next door. He tilted his head in the direction of an old, run-down cabin and no trespassing signs. This is Bunny. He needs help. Xander held out his hoodie, and I grabbed it with care, taking it to the table. Bunny. I didn't know spit about animals other than the ones on the farm. Even then, I only knew about basic care. I certainly had no ability to take care of a sick rabbit. I pulled back the warm fabric and caught myself as I almost screamed out a wide array of cuss words all in a row. This poor creature had been bitten. Badly. Possibly more than bitten. He wasn't going to make it. How was I supposed to tell this kid my grandmother died, and he was about to lose his pet all in the same conversation? It would break him. He might have a tough facade, but it broke so quickly that I had a feeling this would be one blow too many for him. What happened? Maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. Like when someone gets a cut on their forehead and they look like they had just been attacked by zombies because there was so much blood. Please let it be that. I think a fox. My dogs chased it away before I got there, but the paw prints looked like fox. I looked around, and I didn't see a bunny nest. Maybe he's a boy, but I can't tell. Hopefully there aren't any babies. He sighed, obviously distressed by the whole situation. The dogs chasing the fox away might not have been a kindness for this poor creature. Right now, he looked like he might appreciate the relief only death could bring him. He wasn't even trying to get away. That was not a good sign. I am not a vet. As if trying to prove me Dr. Dolittle or something, Daisy came traipsing in. The silly pig thought she was a dog and my sweet Grams had let her. I used to corral her outside when she snuck in but had long since given up. At least she was smallish for a pig. A vet won't see him. Dr. Barry only sees cats and dogs, and really only dogs. He's kind of a butt. And besides, vets cost money. I don't have any. I'd have offered to pay, but if the vet was a jackass, which it sounded like might be the case, it would have done nothing but made the situation worse. I had the number for the large animal vet my Grams used. He came to the farm to give vaccines and to take care of the animals when they got sick. I was pretty sure bunnies didn't fall under their normal clientele, but maybe I'd give them a call once the boy left. I'll see what I can do. My Grams would have been better at this. I said more to myself than the kid. I needed to watch my words. I wasn't used to being around children. Can I come back and check on him? I need to go and take care of the dogs before. He snapped his mouth shut, and I had a feeling whatever was coming next was not something I wanted to hear, so I didn't push it. Sure. Do you want me to call the vet for the dogs? If money were the issue, that was something I could help with. No, they're just being loud. He looked down at the bunny. Don't die. Okay? My heart broke in two. I was going to save this bunny. The question remained, how?
Chapter 2, Jase. When I decided to pull over and stretch my legs after 8 hours in the car, I anticipated a little run, nothing more. I'd been so stupid, not bothering to scent the area thoroughly first. My sleep-deprived haze resulted in a lapse in judgment that almost cost me my life. I'd been on my way to start a new job. A crappy job, but a job was a job, and it paid halfway decent. The company I worked for back east had been kind enough to put out feelers for all their employees when their closing became imminent. About half of the employees were lucky and found local jobs. I was in the second category that had to move. But still, I was glad not to be in the group of my former colleagues who were still looking for work. I was trying to look at this as an adventure and not what it really was, which was a pain in the ass. That's what I got for having a generic degree instead of something more specialized. What had I thought I would become? An English professor? The countryside was beautiful where I stopped. I had never been a city guy, but had spent the last couple of years there trying to make ends meet. If I'd had my way, I'd have been living in a place like wherever it was I stopped. All I could see for miles were farmhouses and a quaint little downtown. I shucked my clothes and allowed my bunny to take over. Of all the shifters in the world, I had to be the fluffiest, most useless one out there. Wolves could hunt and defend their property. Bears could fish and intimidate the entire food chain. Heck, even owls had their practical uses, keeping mice away or some shit. But no, I wasn't anything cool or tough like that. I was born a bunny. Had my parents also been bunnies, life would have been much different for me. But I was one of the very lucky few who possessed a recessive gene that made me a bunny shifter and not the fierce wolves they were. And when I had my first shift, well, let's just say it was interesting. Or mortifying. It sucked so bad that I told my family I wasn't going to stay with our pack because I needed to pursue my dreams of becoming an English something since I had no practical dreams. Thankfully, they allowed my pretense, knowing how hard it had been for me growing up with all my friends shifting into my natural predators. Happy to be out of the car, I hopped around, enjoying the stretch in my legs and the feel of my fur in the wind. Unfortunately, the same wind had come from the wrong direction, shifting only quickly enough for me to run a few feet as the scent of a fox tickled my nose. Had I been a predatory shifter, I could have attacked the creature. Shit, had I been a quick shifter, I could have become human before he got to me. I was neither of those. The rest of it was a blur that ended up with me being wrapped in a hoodie by some kid. I wanted to shift. Needed to shift. But my injuries prevented me from doing so. The kid promised he'd take good care of me, get me to some miracle worker old lady. I believed him. I had no choice, falling in and out of consciousness along the way. I spent my youth besting wolves in the chase, and yet now, when it truly mattered, I lost to a freaking fox. A real one too, not even a shifter with the brain capacity of a human. I was officially the loser of the shifter kingdom. Yay, recessive genes. The next thing I knew, I was being looked at by someone who was definitely not an old lady. His scent was all lavender and calming and very much human. A vet, I hoped. Although the location appeared to be an old lady's bathroom, complete with three-dimensional wall hangings of seahorses. But I didn't care about that. I was too focused on the man. He was cleaning my fur with a washcloth, his strokes so soft. I'm going to do the best I can for you, little fella. He turned to the side, and while I couldn't see what he was doing, it sounded as if he were wringing out the washcloth. I promised Xander I would do whatever I could for you, and I will. I have a feeling his life is not too good, so how about you pull through this so he can smile again? I surmised that Xander was the boy I remembered bringing me in, and inner me smiled at the way the man spoke to me as if I were a human. The sensation in my body was beyond the point of pain by that point, which was both terrifying and oddly comforting. I'm almost done cleaning this side of you. Then I'll need to roll you over and check out the other side, which is going to suck. How about you don't bite me when I do that, yeah? If I'm bleeding and you're bleeding, there's no way I'll be able to see where the bandages go. He kept tending my wound and chattering away. He was right about rolling over. It sucked. But from the words he spoke, I was doing less horribly than I felt. If I could heal just a little bit, I'd be able to shift and speed things along dramatically. I did call the vet, just so you know. I don't want you to think I'm being a cheap-ass loser. I had been thinking a lot of things as he spoke to me and tended me so carefully, and him being a cheap loser had not been one of them.
Chapter 3, August. The bunny was getting better. Or so I thought. I'd spent enough time on the farm that I knew a bit about dealing with injuries, but I was far from a vet, or even a vet tech, for that matter. The YouTube videos I watched when the vet Grams used told me just to put the fellow down sight unseen helped a little bit, but it was still a crapshoot. I had expected Xander to come over again to see how his bunny was, but he didn't. I almost stopped by his house to give him an update, but then some barking dogs were silenced by a single shotgun fire that was followed by a dog crying, and I thought I might not be welcomed over there. His family was good and fucked up. I had assumed that was the case when he'd stopped by, but there was no denying it after I heard a dog being shot. At least a second shot hadn't come. I needed to get that other dog out of there. And there I was thinking like I owned the place. Which I did, but only long enough to figure things out. I wasn't planning on staying forever. Probably. I had a life back in the city. Sure, no one would describe it as exciting, but I had a small group of friends and a routine I enjoyed. That was something. Hey, little one. I gently patted the bunny's head. It wasn't a good idea to pet wild animals, but he did better when I touched him. It was weird. Like my petting him gave him comfort. It was probably more wish fulfillment for my actions to do some good. I need to go check on the horses and the pig. I stroked his head again. I'll be back, though. I promise. He looked up at me and moved his head in a way that could have almost been taken as nodding in agreement. I had so many chores still to do before the night fell. I pulled on my muck boots, grabbed my work gloves that lived in the mudroom, and headed out. When I first came to the farm, I saw this as what it was, a huge chore. But now that I was in a routine, it was more like taking care of my family. Which was not good. I needed to leave soon. I had a career. And a home, or place to live, anyway. Oh, Grams, I spoke aloud as I headed to the barn. The horses were out in their pen, so I took the time to clean out their stalls and make sure they had fresh water and food. They would be at the barn entrance as soon as they heard the latch click, looking for their dinner. I'd been really impressed the first time I saw Grams do that, thinking that rounding up the horses would be a hot mess. You watch too many movies, she teased. These ain't no rodeo animals. They're pets, and what do pets love more than anything? Their owner? I guessed. Wrong. She made a sound like a buzzer going off. They like to eat. They know it's food time. She had been right, of course. She always had been. Although, in a way, she'd been wrong too. The animals on this farm mourned her loss. Daisy the pig came looking for her every day as if she would magically appear. Henrietta the goose humped where her car used to be parked. The cat meowed on her chair on the porch and once in a while on her kitchen stool. Those animals loved and missed her. So did I. Sure enough, the horses came trotting in one at a time, walking straight into their stalls as soon as they heard me. They had been brushed already, but Becca, the miniature horse, only ate while being brushed. Thankfully, being a mini made that a doable task. I closed the stalls one at a time until I got to hers. She stood there by the hay, just waiting for me. Spoiled girl. I picked up her brush and began to groom her. She immediately started eating. You know, not everyone would be willing to do this for you. As I spoke the words out loud, I heard the truth in them. When I sold the farm, I would need to rehome her to the right person. The vet had told Grams that Becca would eat eventually. The poor thing was already underweight, the result of someone who thought it would be super fun to have a horse they could bring in the house and then realized horses were work and that they smelled. Grams ignored his advice, and when he came back the next visit excited about her progress, Grams, according to her version of her story, told him that was what food would do to you and walked away. Knowing her, she probably filtered that story for me and there were likely some choice cuss words in there as well. Once the horses were done, I went to deal with Daisy. She seriously thought she was a dog, and unlike the horse, had free reign of the property. I walked over to her pig house, one designed for a dog complete with the word dog on the front wall. A sharp whistle had Daisy running over. Silly pig. You want dinner. While feeding the pig, my mind kept wandering back to that poor bunny and then to the asshole next door. It was none of my business. I knew this. I had no proof he did anything wrong to the boy, but as far as I was concerned, a man who killed dogs was never too far from abusing humans. Eat up, Daisy. I closed her small enclosure, something I only did at night, and peeked in to make sure the goose was fine. The fowl didn't like to be bothered, so I tried to stay away from them. The only one she seemed to like was the cat. Even still, their visits were only long enough to boss her around. Those two were quite the pair. My stomach began to rumble. Guess it's time to feed myself too. Night, guys, I called to them all, talking to them like they were family. Just like Grams had always done. Leaving them was going to be hard.
Chapter 4. Jase. August created a warm nest of towels in a box and left me a plate of hay and some carrots. It nourished my vegetarian side, but I was anxious for the day I could eat a steak as a human again. A nice grilled tri-tip was sounding better and better as the days passed. Not to mention, I had other cravings that needed to be satisfied. There's a reason rabbits procreate so readily. We're horny as fuck. I don't know the biology behind it, but whenever I was in my bunny body, I was always in a strange state of arousal, seeking out a mate. The bunny friends I met in an internet group for those of us blessed with the recessive gene had similar experiences in their animal forms. But most of them were mated, so they had someone to help them sate those needs. Unfortunately for me, I usually got stuck with some videos and my hand after I shifted back to human. Of course, I'd never been in my bunny state for more than a few hours at a time, and I had a feeling my need for release would be tenfold by the time I finally had a hand again. Watching August walk around the house naked before and after his showers was also messing with my head. The first time he walked into the kitchen where my box was stationed, I turned away, wanting to give him some privacy. But then I remembered he had no idea I wasn't 100% rodent. In fact, he probably didn't even know shifters existed. As soon as I realized that, I gave myself permission to fully perv out on the guy, watching his cock swing as he walked and craning my neck for a better view when he bent down to pick up the water dish on the floor just a few feet in front of me. I'd pretty much been in a constant state of arousal since I started healing. When I finally released all this pent-up need, I expected it would be the biggest load of my life. But thinking about that moment just made matters worse. Instead, I tried to focus on August and his constant chatter. Truthfully, it was kinda nice to hear him talking to me about the other animals and his concerns over Xander. But it also made me want to shift back into my human form even more. I think one of his dogs was shot today. August sighed as he cradled me in the crook of his arm and rubbed my belly. No human had ever handled me in this form before, so it was disconcerting at first. But now I looked forward to those moments when I could hear his heartbeat thudding in his chest and the soft breaths against my fur as he spoke. I'm not positive, but that's what it sounded like. So, he might not be by to see you for a few more days. August looked out the window then down at me. Or should we go check on him? I mean, I don't think he's in any real danger, but now I'm getting kinda worried. August carried me to the window and stared out toward his neighbor's house. You tell me if we needed to check on him, right, Bunny? I twitched my nose and did my best head nod without making it obvious I could understand what he was saying. It's not like I actually knew the kid or what was happening at his house. I just wanted August to feel heard, and to keep talking. August nodded down at me then walked back to the fridge and pulled out a beer. Yeah, you're right. He's probably just comforting his other dog. He'll be by soon. The beer looked so good. It was one of the first times when I wanted to shift out of August's grip and become human again, so I could have a damn beer. But I still wasn't strong enough. Once the blood I'd lost was fully replenished, I'd be able to regain my human form and walk right out the front door. Or into August's bed. I hadn't fully decided what I'd do at that point. It wasn't like I could just tell August I was a bunny shifter. He'd never understand and would probably tranquilize me and hand me over to researchers, or a mental institution. I curled into the warmth of August's chest and dozed off. Think I'm crazy, right? I opened my eyes and saw August staring down at me. And you'd be right. I am crazy. He chuckled humorlessly and took a swig of his beer. I glanced at the table and saw 3 empty bottles lined up beside him. He was so warm. And he smelled so good. I could stay tucked up against him forever. My eyes started to drift shut again when he jostled slightly. I mean, look at me. I'm sitting here, talking to a rabbit as if you're my best friend, and actually considering what my life would look like if I stayed on this damn farm. Stayed? What else would he do? This was his home, wasn't it? Just because this was my favorite place to be when I was a kid doesn't mean this is where I belong as an adult. He shifted his weight so he was lying on the sofa with me still on his chest. I moved up a few inches so I was burrowing in his neck. If I could have shifted, I would have. I would have become a human man, naked and aroused on top of August's sexy body as he was pinned to the cushions. But I wasn't ready to shift back. Not yet, anyway. I just needed a few more days, and then I'd be healed enough to shift. But fuck, I like it. He lifted me up with both hands and held me in front of his face so he was looking right into my eyes. And you, sweet thing, make me feel like this is exactly where I should be, doing exactly what I should be doing. My heart was racing when he rubbed his nose against mine, then tucked me back against his neck. Who knows? Maybe I'll just have to take you back home with me when I leave. I'm kinda getting used to having you around.
Chapter 5. August. You look pretty amazing, little fellow. I bet you're anxious to get back to your life in the wild. Heck, maybe you have a mate and a passel of babies waiting for you. I heard rabbits have a thing for procreating. I laughed at my own bad humor. They don't say going at it like bunnies for nothing. Am I right? I swore the little guy shook his head at me, and frankly, I deserved it. Standing there and talking to a bunny as if he were my buddy was insanity at its best. Yet there I was, almost dreading the day he left. Because I knew that day was coming soon. You can stay, though. I mean, if you don't get all healed up and back to normal, you can stay here. I rubbed the top of the little guy's head and sat down to put my shoes on. I'd gotten so used to wearing muck boots around the farm that tying my shoes felt like a pain in the ass. I needed to get out more. I'm going to check on the kid and then run some errands. I'll tell him you said hello. He'll know it's bullshit, 'cause bunnies don't talk, but maybe it will make him smile. I stood up and brushed off my jeans. I have a feeling he doesn't smile a lot. I found a picture in the barn I think he made for my grams of her and Lux sitting on the porch. That cat, I shook my head, thinking of how much time I'd wasted trying to get him back inside where I knew he once enjoyed at least part of his day. I didn't blame him. Had I lost the most important person in my life, I probably wouldn't be too keen on being reminded of the hurt daily. And being in the kitchen on the stool, I remembered him often sitting it might do just that. But what the fuck did I know about cats? I was projecting again. I'd been doing that a lot lately. Spending so much time alone had me really thinking about what I wanted in my life. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was this farm. I just hadn't figured out yet if it was my longing for the days of old or my longing to put down roots that was pulling at me so strongly. I needed to figure it out, quickly. See you in a bit. I rubbed the bunny's head again just as the sound of a car on the gravel driveway caught my attention. Oh, looks like we have visitors, I told the little furball as I pulled back the curtains and saw a police car in the driveway. That was never good. I walked out to greet the officers as they emerged from their car. You must be Angeline's grandson. The one she was always bragging on, a slightly older man said with a sad smile. I gave him a nod. Yes, sir. I'm August. She is very missed. I'm sorry for your loss. Thanks, officer. I held out my hand. So, is this about the shooting next door? No, but maybe we should start with that. He took my hand in his and gave it a shake. Deputy Ron Stanford, and that's Officer John. Shall we take a seat on the porch? He was already heading that way. He'd only been sitting down for a second when Lux jumped on his lap, and he beamed. I see you and Lux have already met. I smiled as I joined him on the porch, taking a seat in the rocker. Lux and I are good friends, aren't we? He rubbed under the cat's chin. I'm the one who brought him to your grams. Figured he'd fit in here. He does. All the misfits that inhabited the place fit in just right, including myself. So, what brings you here? A strange finding in the field not too far from here. We found an abandoned car and clothing, but no man. Thought you might have seen him. My brain began imagining the worst. Shit, I thought my neighbor shot one of the dogs. Fuck. What if he shot a person? Talk about leaping to a conclusion. Maybe I was spending too much time alone and talking to furry critters, and feathery ones. Whoa there, buddy. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, although I think we need to check on your neighbor. Which direction? Over there, has a kid named Xander. I pointed in the direction of the gunshots. Really, the man probably only shot a dog. Not that it isn't awful to shoot a dog, but it's not the same level of awful as shooting a human. Okay, fine, it is the same awful in my opinion, just not under the law. I'll shut up now. It was official. I needed to talk to humans before I turned into that weird person everyone in town walks away from if they get too close in the grocery store. I'll check on the kid. That's what you're worried about, right? Yeah. He brought me a bunny that had been hurt and he seemed like he might need help. At the time, Xander didn't seem to need immediate help, but since help sat there in front of me, I might as well ask. You need to go over there about the missing guy anyway, right? I fed him an excuse, something he probably didn't need, but it eased my fear about possibly making things worse for the kid. Not my first time to the rodeo. The deputy winked. And if you see a naked guy running around, please give dispatch a holler. Sheriff Martin thinks he might be trouble. It didn't sound like the deputy did, so at least there was that. If he is running around naked, chances are he needs medical assistance of some kind, so best to be careful. We didn't find any drugs at the scene, but they usually aren't far behind when it comes to things like this. Great. There was probably a drugged-out naked man running around near my farm. Just what I needed. And funny how my brain went to it being my farm, which was probably exactly what Grams had intended.
Chapter 6. Jase. Damn it. Why was I so stupid? Obviously, I didn't expect to abandon my car and my clothes, but I should have done a better job of hiding it so I had a bit more time. Now the police were looking for me. I guess it was good that this community looked out for people and all that, but the last thing I wanted was to have the police thinking I was in need of emergency mental health care when I was finally able to shift back. Being trapped as a bunny was proving hard on me. The same would prove true being trapped as a human. If I was hospitalized for a sanity check after finally getting my freedom, I really would go insane. I never wanted to experience this kind of forced containment again. Ever. I tried hard not to think about that as I eavesdropped on the two men through the open window. The boy, Xander, was still on Augie's, as I'd nicknamed him, mind. He was such a caring soul. I knew from his babbling that he had worked in real estate for a while, and I just couldn't picture it. I didn't know him well, but I knew he wasn't meant to be behind a computer in a suit and tie. Augie was right where he was supposed to be, caring for people and animals on that farm. And even though he mumbled about going home now and then, he was never more animated or excited as when he talked to the animals, myself included, about his day. Real estate was probably good for some people, but not my Augie. He was a caretaker through and through. When the officers left, I expected August to head out on his errands, but he came straight back in and picked me up. Hey, bunny. I wiggled my nose and licked the side of his hand, my own version of hello for the moment. I don't know if you heard all that, but the nice officer is going to check on Xander. He scratched behind my ears. My guess is he'll probably be by to check on you a little later. So, if you want to make him happy, you can give him a little lick too. He's probably worried about you. I doubted that. The kid only knew me for a few minutes before leaving me with August. I wasn't complaining because if he hadn't brought me here, who knows what would have happened to me. I probably would have been a snack for his dogs. But if he came by, I'd lick his hand too. That kid seemed like he needed some care and affection, and I was happy to give him some. I guess I'll run to the feed store now, so you get some rest before we have company. I curled into a ball in Augie's palms, quite comfortable to nap right where I was. No, no, no. August lowered me onto the blanket I'd been sleeping on since my arrival. Not on me this time. In your bed. I wanted to pout but had to settle for lowering my ears in defeat. I'd hoped to win him over, but he just scratched my head with a finger before walking out of the kitchen and to the old truck out front. Are you sure he's okay? I woke up to the sensation of being lifted out of my bed. Usually, that was a welcomed feeling because it meant Augie wanted a cuddle, but the hands holding me were all wrong. I opened my eyes and saw Xander's little face staring down at me. Almost good as new. August stood beside the boy and rubbed my back with his thumb. You saved him at just the right time. Xander turned to August and smiled. He looks like he's ready to go back to his family. Augie cleared his throat and looked like he was going to take me from the child's grasp but then folded his arms over his chest. Yeah, maybe. What do you mean? Xander pressed me to his chest and I could hear his little heart pounding. He's not gonna die, is he? No, no, August quickly reassured the boy before walking to the table and taking a seat. I just mean that sometimes animals that have been injured or in captivity for a while don't do well when they go back into the wild. He might not be able to protect himself as well as he used to. Xander sighed heavily, then held me up in front of his nose so he could look into my eyes. Where will he live then? I immediately turned to Augie, wondering if he was about to disappoint me or make my freaking day. August shrugged, then reached for the edge of the placemat, not making eye contact with me or Xander. I don't know, but I guess he can stay here. I have plenty of room and you can visit him anytime you want. Really? I glanced back at Xander, wondering if he was happy or sad by that. It wasn't easy to read his expression, but I got the feeling he was a little bit of both. It sounded like his home wasn't exactly welcoming to stray animals, and maybe having a pet live next door was the best option in his eyes. That's really nice of you. Yeah, of course. I've kinda grown an attachment to the little guy. I don't really want to see him go. But can he be my bunny, even if he lives here? I could hear the hope in Xander's voice and knew Augie could too. His heart was too kind to not give in to whatever this kid wanted. Sure, he's totally yours. August leaned forward, resting his forearms and elbows on the table. But he'll be safe here. No dogs or dads to bother him. At the mention of his dad, Xander's shoulders drooped and his chin fell to his chest. My dad shot Stray, my dog. I nuzzled into Xander's hand and licked his fingers, hoping to give him comfort in the only way I could. I was afraid of that, August said softly. Why did he do it? Xander shrugged and held me closer to his chest. I never know why he does stuff. He just gets mad sometimes and whoever he sees is the one who gets punished. Augie's eyes narrowed and he looked as livid as I felt. Does he punish you? Xander nodded twice without looking away from his fingers in my fur. Only when I'm bad. You're never bad enough that he can hurt you, Xander. August read my mind, saying exactly the words I wanted to say, but in a much nicer way. If I were human, I would have thrown in a few extra curse words before stomping out the door to have a word with this dad of his. I try to be good so he doesn't need to. Xander looked up at me and met August's gaze with tears in his eyes. That's why the dog got shot. I dropped a plate and made a lot of noise. When my dad woke up and yelled at me, I got scared and ran out the back door. I hid in the shed till after I heard the gunshot. August got up and wrapped his arm around Xander's shoulder, giving him a gentle hug while pressing me against his hip. I'm so sorry, buddy. That shouldn't have happened. But I want you to know you can always come over here. Day or night, if you're scared or you think your dad might want to punish you, just run over here and hide. I'll deal with him if he figures out where you are. Thanks, August. Xander stood up and handed me to Augie before wiping the tears off his cheeks with the back of his dirty hands. But I'll be okay. I know how to stay out of his way now.
Chapter 7. August. Becca, you need to eat. I scolded her the way Grams had always done when the horse got good and stubborn. Unlike Grams, I'd cave and bring her some apples eventually. I refreshed her water and took her out to her enclosure so I could muck out her stall. For a tiny creature, she sure shit a lot. It had been 2 days since Xander had been by, and I couldn't stop thinking about his dad. He'd been checked on, of course, and I'd seen him so I knew he hadn't been shot. It just felt like the poor kid was on borrowed time before he was beaten. Or worse, found himself on the wrong side of his father's gun. And then there was the dog. I wanted so badly to offer to keep the dog he had left. But between the cat and bunny and the goose, I had a feeling it might not work out any better having him here. I knew there had to be an answer to make things better. I just needed to find it. Hey, bunny. I had taken to telling the little ball of fluff my every move. It probably wasn't the best choice, but I decided to keep him and buy him a proper cage. If he wasn't already capable of getting out of his box, he soon would be. How would you like a real bed? His little head perked up. I swore the little fur ball understood me when I rambled on. You're getting better, and it's about time you had a better crib. Are people still calling homes cribs? I don't even know, but I'm going to go to town and get you a nice one. I reached in the box and rubbed behind his left ear, which appeared to be his favorite place. I hope it's okay that I keep you. I scooped him up. I'd feel bad if you had a little family waiting for you, but honestly, you're mine now, which is creepy and weird, and don't tell Xander. He'll be sad. We can just pretend you're his, okay? He scrunched his little nose and I could have sworn he nodded. Silly bunny. No. Silly me. I needed to get out more. Or not. I kinda like things the way they were. I put him gently in the box, kissing his little head before I set him down. There were probably 50 reasons why I shouldn't allow myself to even pet, much less kiss, a wild animal, but the more I got to know the little guy, the more I thought he might be a pet that got away. Or worse, one that was dumped after Easter cuteness turned into a commitment. I read an article on that somewhere last year, and even then, it had my blood curdling. Now that my best friend was a rabbit, it was even worse. I'll be back soon. And I'll get you more of those leeks you seem to like so much, I promised before I drove to the feed store. They were as close as a place came to a pet store, and they would probably have something to tide me over until I figured out how Bunny would fit into the household after he was given free rein. My initial concern had been Lux, but the day he snuck into the kitchen to sit in Grams's seat, he looked at the rabbit and then walked away as if he couldn't be bothered. And for a cat that still managed to bring me mice and birds and even a squirrel once, that had surprised me. I didn't risk it by inviting Lux into the kitchen or anything, but I had a feeling he figured out that the rabbit was one of us, a member of the motley crew that was Grams's farm. The feed store was oddly crowded, so instead of asking for help as I planned, I meandered the aisles, filling my cart with things I hadn't intended on buying, wasting time until I could get help. Lux had a bunch of new toys and treats headed his way, as did Daisy. I also picked up some pig's ears for Xander's dog, which felt awkward given they were next to Daisy's new ball. Cats and dogs? A man older than me asked. And a pig. I smiled proudly. He squinted as he looked over my bounty. Ah, you must be Angeline's grandbaby. He looked at me, probably expecting an answer. Daisy loves balls, he added, most likely sensing my confusion. Yeah, she does. I'm August. I held out my hand. Willis. Although most people call me Doc, on account of me being the only doctor in town. He gave my hand a firm shake. I was friends with your grandmother. We played euchre together. I'd learned quickly after I got to town that was the predominant social activity. I'd never played the card game myself, and that got me more than a few peculiar looks. Nice to meet you. This place is hopping today. My mind immediately rushed back to why I was there. I nursed a hurt rabbit back to health and was looking to upgrade his habitat from the cardboard box I fished out of my recycling bin. How injured is he? I know something about raising rabbits. I had them as a kid. Now I just have a dog who loves these things. He held up a hoof. They reek, though, so best not to start the addiction. Duly noted. Grams had said the same thing about them. Bunny looks almost good as new. Thank goodness. And he's staying in a box. Yeah, I think maybe he was a pet or something. I'd thought it weird too, but the way Doc said it made me think it was beyond weird. Maybe he was more hurt than I thought. Fuck. That wouldn't be good. Not only for Xander, but I love the little fluff ball. Or something more likely. He waved his hand for me to follow him. The hutches are over here, but they're designed for outdoor use. You may want to just go to some online pet place. He pointed out the hutches which were lined up from tiny to the ones that had to be custom ordered. We chatted back and forth, and I agreed these weren't going to be the best choice for Bunny, especially if he had been a pet. Thanks for all your help. Thanks for distracting me. I don't know if you've heard, but a man has gone missing. He spoke in hushed tones, the entire conversation feeling a bit strange. But then again, this was a man I just randomly met at a feed store, so maybe he just liked to gossip. I did hear that. Did you know him? Nah, but if you run into him, call me and I'll come see him. For free, of course. He'll probably be too scared to go to the hospital or a clinic in the city because there may be drugs, you see. His stilted explanation made sense to him, so I went with it. For all I knew, he was speaking from experience. How wrong I was.
Chapter 8. Jase. I woke from my nap, stretching out all my limbs. For the first time, I actually felt whole, or almost whole, at least. I perked up and listened to the surroundings, trying to determine if Augie was back from his trip to town yet. Since I didn't hear anything, I decided to give shifting a go. When I hopped out of the box, a sense of amusement passed through me. He never thought it was odd that I just stayed put in that stupid box. Sure, at first, I wasn't able to flee even if I wanted to. But I was very obviously well enough to escape now. Not that I wanted to go anywhere. That in itself should have struck me as crazy, but there was just something about this place. Well, something about Augie that had me longing to stay. I took 3 big breaths and jumped to the floor, bracing myself for impact. Had I been on my A game, I might have been able to shift mid-jump. Maybe. But I was lucky to wrangle up my D game at best. I landed with a thud and Lux came in, giving me the look she always did. The one that said you ain't no rabbit. Which, quite honestly, had been my saving grace. Too bad the fox didn't figure that out too. I closed my eyes and called my skin. The process was slower and more painful than even my first shift had been, but that was to be expected. I just didn't think it'd be this bad. It will get better from here. It had to. I needed to shift more than just this once, no matter how much it hurt. I rose from the ground on my 2 feet for the first time in, I'd lost count of how many days. My legs were a bit wobbly and my thighs burned, but I was upright. And human. I took a few steps with my hand on the counter and started to get my bearings. I messed with the towels enough that it looked like I was in the box, and then I shook my head at the silly task. Why would I go back in the box? Ever. And really, how could I get back in there in the first place? Shift on the counter. Lux came up to me and tentatively licked my ankle before he walked outside, as if beckoning me to follow. So I did, the fresh air almost like a hug. Thanks, Lux. You're a good cat. I reached down and gave him a pat. Thanks for not eating me. And with that, he'd had enough, so he sat down on the rocking chair and proceeded to ignore me. Hello. Augie's voice slammed into me, reminding me where I was. Fuck. 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 He was home. I should have at least wrapped a towel around myself before walking outside. Not that being mostly naked except for the homeowner's towel was any better than the situation I was currently in. Hi. I grabbed the pillow off the chair Lux was on. That earned me the look of death from the cat as I put it in front of my now filling cock. The damn thing picked now to decide to wake up from my shift, and knowing the way things worked, it was going to stay like that until I took care of it. Sadly, that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Are you okay? Is that your car they found? He spoke awkwardly from the sidewalk leading up to the porch. I was just putting the animal feed away, but if you give me a minute, I could grab you some clothes and get you some help. Well, that's not what I was expecting. He wasn't running, reaching for a gun or a phone, or threatening me in any manner. He was just being Augie. The man wasn't only kind to animals and children, he was kind, period. My bunny perked up at that. Stay down, little one. You've had plenty of time. It's my turn now. Yeah, I mean I don't know about the car, but probably. I hit my head, and I'm not really sure about most things. I saw your porch and I was making up random shit on the fly, but I couldn't tell him the truth. Lux, move. Augie tried to shoo the cat away, but he stayed put. The man needs a place to sit. He sighed, eyed the feline who slowly stood up and jumped off. You can sit here, and I'll get you some clothes. The cat jumped back up and hissed at him. There was no denying he ruled the roost. Just then, Daisy appeared and sat down at my feet. Really, Daisy? He held up his hands in exacerbation as Henrietta started to honk from the far side of the porch. They were all gathering around. protecting me in their own unusual ways. Maybe I should go. I don't know what made me make the offer considering I wasn't sure if I really could, but it seemed like the right thing to say. Do you know where my car is now? I got lost and turned around. And was brought here in a hoodie after being mauled by a fox. No. It is very obvious they want you to stay. Let's get you a shower and some clothing. He cleared his throat when his voice hitched. Did he like what he saw? Damn it. I shouldn't be thinking like that, but I was. I pressed the pillow closer to me. Okay. Because what else could I really say to that? After we get you all cleaned up and fed, we'll figure out what to do about your car and your head. Doc said if I saw ya, he'd hook you up for free. He's a good guy, from what my gram said, so he can be trusted. Thanks. I stepped out of Augie's way so he could open the door. When he left, I went inside, my stomach lurching at the movement. He must have noticed my pained expression. Do you want me to call Doc now? No. Sorry. I stubbed my toe. I didn't like lying but it just slipped out. Maybe later. Yeah. Let me know, and just so you know, I suck and there are no drugs here except the aspirin Grams used to take, and I'm pretty sure it's way past the expiration date. That's fine. I don't believe in drugs. Shifters tended not to respond well to them, so we stayed away altogether. Oh, okay. He waved for me to follow him through the kitchen and toward the bathroom, mumbling to me, or where he thought the furry me was, something about sleeping until he takes care of things. That was going to present a problem, but for now, I needed to regroup, get my human side fully back on track, and figure out a plan. What a freaking mess I'd gotten myself into. It would be far less messy if my bunny hadn't pushed himself back to the forefront and whispered one single word to me. Mate.
Chapter 9. August. The sound of the shower turning on made me relax slightly. The poor man needed help, and for a few seconds there, I was afraid I'd scare him away because I was being so weird. The last thing he needed was to be naked and alone in the woods again, or worse yet, stumbling upon my trigger, happy neighbor. I thought back to Doc's comments and how awkward they were at the time, but now that I met the man, it sorta made sense. Doc knew people, and anyone who was confused enough to be naked in the woods was going to be on edge about getting help. Now I just needed to figure out how to get the man to visit Doc. I padded off to my bedroom and looked for some clothing that might fit him. He was taller than me but not by much. His build, however, was completely different. He had long, lean muscles. Not that I was looking. Fine, I had been looking, but I felt guilty about it. My clothes would swim on him, so I fished out a pair of sweats and a t-shirt and called it good enough. Then I grabbed a pair of boxer briefs and socks, unsure if he would be willing to wear them given those weren't the kind of things people typically borrowed from strangers. I hung everything up on the door of the bathroom and was about to knock when I heard him groan. Poor guy must be in a lot of pain. Unfortunately, that's not the message my body got. My lower brain took the groan as a call to arms. Stupid little head. I knocked 3 times and called out that the clothes were on the doorknob, then turned away to go start the grill. I'd picked up some steaks at the store on my way home with the intention of having them for a couple of meals, but if he'd been without food and decent water for the past few days, he was likely low on iron. I got the grill going, then walked to my car to grab the bag of groceries still waiting for me. Steak, store, bought potato salad, and bagged lettuce was the best I could do for my new guest. I had the mismatched plates and utensils on the table by the time the door to the bathroom clicked open. "I'm in the kitchen," I called. "But I'm going outside to check on the steaks. If you need help, I'm pretty good behind a grill." He stepped into the doorframe, his hair disheveled and a smile on his face. He looked exhausted, but other than that, he seemed to be okay. "You can keep me company." Instinctively, I returned his smile. "They're not the best cuts, but it's what I've got. Anything sounds great right now." He followed me outside, then sat on the stoop as I adjusted the flames on the grill. "I tend to eat mine medium. How about you?" I peeked up at him over the lid of the grill. "Yeah, that sounds good." He bit his lower lip, and damn if I wasn't staring at it. Why are you so nice? That snapped me out of my ogling because I was many things, but nice wasn't one of them. Not nice, just doing what my Grams would have wanted. This was her place, and I guess it's mine now. So, yeah, that's kind of how this place always has been. You met the three-legged cat and the pig and the bloody goose. I leaned a bit closer and shouted, she drives me bonkers. The darn thing hisses more than the cat. He chuckled at that, a rich deep sound that warmed me from the inside. What was it about this man? Maybe it was the farm. Maybe there was just something magical here that had made it a refuge for all, including, shit, I didn't even know his name. What should I call you? Oh, sorry. I'm Jase, and I was on my way to start a new job. He leaned to the side, his head resting on the column. Maybe after dinner you'll let me take you to Doc's. Grams trusted him, which means I do too. I flipped the steaks over, wishing I'd had the foresight to buy some better ones. Yeah, maybe. His response was so soft I had to strain to hear him. One glance in his direction told me why. The poor guy was falling asleep on the stoop. These will be done in 3 minutes. How about we eat quickly and then I'll get you a place to sleep. Doc will be there in the morning. He didn't answer, his eyes fully closed. I reached in my pocket and pulled out my phone to look up head injuries. I was trying to figure out if sleep was the best plan, but the more I read, the more uncertain I became. Maybe I needed to call Doc and have him come over now. The only thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't going to call the sheriff. Something about the way Deputy Ron referred to him made me think of him as a last resort. Something told me Jase didn't bring danger with him, and as weird as his story had been, he gave me no indication that he was lying. No, he was someone who needed help, and if I did anything other than that, I'd be going against everything this place stood for. Wake up, sleepyhead, I called to him softly as I plated up the steaks and turned off the grill. Dinner is served. He gave me a sleepy smile and my breath hitched. He was stunning like that. All relaxed and happy. If you want to sleep first, I can wrap this up for you and reheat it later. He shook his head and stood up, stretching his arms out with a yawn. I can eat. I guess I'm just more tired than I thought. We went into the kitchen and ate in silence. Jase dug into his steak and potato salad like it was his job, but he left the lettuce completely untouched. I showed him to my room, and after a very brief attempt at turning down the offer, he climbed into my bed and curled into a ball, immediately closing his eyes. I would set up Grams's room as a guest room in the morning. It wasn't healthy for me to leave it closed off the way I had, and maybe that was why this stranger showed up needing a place to stay and a warm meal. Grams always said this place was like a magnet for those who belonged here, and maybe for this brief period of time, Jase belonged here. Gods, I missed her. I looked down at Jase, already sleeping soundly. He was so trusting. For all he knew, I could have been a cannibal or something. When I was sure he was down for the count, I tiptoed out of the room, closing the door behind me. I had animals to feed and a bunny to check on. Then why is it so hard to leave the room, much less the house?
Chapter 10. Jase. Here, Bunny, Bunny. The door to the room opens up and Augie's silhouette is perfectly outlined against the hall light. Wherever you're hiding, you can come out now. August. I lean up on my elbow and blink a few times to adjust my eyes. Is everything okay? Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. He opens the door all the way and sighs heavily. My rabbit is gone. Shit. I forgot about that. Maybe he just wanted to stretch his legs. Maybe. Augie's voice cracked and he sniffed into his elbow. I guess. Hey there. I sat up and reached for the lamp on the nightstand. Don't be upset. Come here. I was shocked and the words came out of my mouth, but even more shocked, and Augie rushed across the room and practically threw himself into my arms. I can't believe he's gone. Well, maybe he's not gone. Damn, how was I going to explain this? He might just be hiding somewhere. I'm sure he'll be back. Augie shook his head against my shoulder. He's gone. I searched the whole house twice and he's never not responded to me. He's never even left his box. He sobbed against me and my heart broke. Wow, you must really love that rabbit. He nodded and pulled back to look me in the eyes. I do. When he said the words, I could almost feel his truth resonating deep in my bones. The pull between us was like a steel rod holding his gaze to mine. It's stupid, I know. But there's something really special about him. He's just. Augie closed his eyes and buried his face in his palms as he cried even harder. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders and held him close to me. I wanted to tell him the truth, but I wasn't sure if that would ease his pain or make him feel worse. He wanted the bunny, but that didn't mean he wanted the man. Having a cute little pet was vastly different from being interested in a man, especially one that had the strange little habit of shifting into a rodent when the mood struck. I'm sure he cares about you too, August. He'll be back. August's shoulders drooped, and he was quiet enough that I wondered if he'd fallen asleep. After several minutes, he cleared his throat and straightened his spine, pulling out of my grip. I'm sure you think I'm crazy by now. His sad smile nearly broke me in two. I wanted to make him happy again. I would do anything to see a real smile on his face. Have a good night. Before I could stop him, Augie was out the door. The clock on the dresser showed it was almost midnight, but I was wide awake. That power nap had done wonders for re-energizing me, and I felt better than I had in a long time. That was one of the other perks of being a shifter. A few good shifts and some rest were often more than enough to cure just about any ailment. I didn't let myself think as I jumped out of bed and headed out of the room to make sure Augie was okay. If he was still looking for me, well, the bunny version of me, I'd have to tell him the truth. Or at least some vague version of the truth. When I found him balled up on the couch with tears streaming down his cheeks, I couldn't help myself. I just wanted him to feel better, and I was willing to do anything to make that happen. Unfortunately, I just made him feel even more crazy when I yanked off the clothes he'd loaned me and shifted into my bunny form, not 2 feet away from where he lay. Augie didn't react at first. For a long second, he just stared without so much as taking a breath. And then his good sense kicked in, and he realized he should be scared. Well, maybe not scared, but definitely shocked. So shocked, in fact, that he hurtled over the sofa and fell on his face before shuffling back against the wall. What are? Who? I almost shifted back just to tell him it was okay, but I wanted to make sure he understood that his bunny wasn't gone. He was just different. I was different. But I was still here. I carefully walked to the end of the sofa and waited for him to control his breathing. He was hyperventilating and I was afraid he'd pass out. He pointed at me and cocked his head. But I don't. I sprawled out on the wood floor so he knew I was harmless and would never hurt him. Bunnies weren't exactly ferocious, but the situation was overwhelming, even to me. Bunny? He whispered as if afraid to say the word out loud. Am I hallucinating? He tentatively reached his hand out toward me but then pulled back when I hopped closer. Even though I knew and completely understood his reaction, it still hurt when he didn't want to touch me. I was sure I was helping the situation by proving to him that his bunny wasn't gone. But maybe that was selfish. Maybe my own desire to make him happy had just made things worse. It wouldn't be the first time my spontaneous decisions caused pain to someone I cared about. And I definitely cared about Augie. Even though I barely knew him as a human, I felt like I knew his true self when he interacted with my bunny. He was real and honest and silly, and, damn it, how did I always manage to screw up a good thing before it even became a thing? This had to be some kind of record. I couldn't stand to see the confusion and fear and uncertainty in his eyes for even a second longer. I had to fix this. Even if he threw me out of his house or called the police, I couldn't bear to witness Augie in pain because of something I did, or was. The room wasn't huge, but there was some open space in front of the fireplace, so I hopped over there and immediately shifted back, impressed with myself at how smooth the transition had been. I was getting my mojo back. As soon as I was human again, I stood up and presented myself to Augie for inspection. I didn't give any thought to my nudity as I held up my palms to him, pleading for his understanding. Please don't be frightened, Augie. It's just me, and I promise you have nothing to be afraid of.
Chapter 11. August. You have nothing to be afraid of. His calm words were bullshit and I knew it. I had plenty to be afraid of. I was losing my damn mind. And why was he naked? Great, either I was delusional or I was dreaming. Yeah, that. I was dreaming. I pinched myself. Oh, why did I think that was a good idea again? And really, when you thought about it, did pinching yourself in a dream hurt? Probably. So what did I accomplish other than giving me something to do as naked Jase stood in my living room after carrying me inside? Nothing but a bruise and humiliation. Why are you naked? I asked, rubbing my eyes. Do you need me to call Doc? Because pretending I hadn't just dreamed about him hopping around like a bunny was the best solution I could come up with. My clothes are over there. He pointed to the place where I saw him stripped down. Not helpful. Not helpful at all. I tried to focus on something logical, but there wasn't a lot to work with. Are you hot? He stared at me a full 5 seconds as he opened and closed his mouth a few times before finally snapping it shut. I'll get a fan. I jumped up from the couch and booked out of there as fast as I could, straight to the attic where I vaguely remembered seeing a fan. It was official. This was a dream with a very naked man, a very naked hot man, that begged to be licked, while I was in the attic. What was wrong with my sorry ass? I dug around behind some boxes, then found a fan I was pretty sure was older than me and came back to the living room, half expecting him to be gone, back in his bed sound asleep, or at least wearing some sort of clothing. Maybe just holding a pillow in front of his delicious-looking dick. Why was I thinking about his cock and licking it like an ice cream cone? Because this was a dream. This was all a dream. And since that was the only possible explanation, I might as well make the most of it. I set the fan on the floor by the couch and pulled my shirt up and over my head. What are you doing? He picked that moment to speak, and it wasn't even to say something sexy like, let me help you with that. Or if he was being all bossy, maybe he'd tell me, if you're going to unwrap my present, you need to grab a condom first. But nope. He had to be all information seeking. Although, I couldn't help noticing his cock begin to fill, so maybe he was just playing it cool. Would the real Jase be like that, or would he pounce on me the way I wanted Dream Jase to? Not that I'd ever know. Real Jase needed my help, not a horny Omega who was desperate for his body. Except, it was more than that, which was weird since I had a total of 1 conversation with him. But I couldn't focus on logic. My brain had given up all its functions to my lower brain, which was now at full mast. The same thing you are? It came out as more of a question than the seductive innuendo I intended. I dropped my shirt to the floor and reached for the buttons on my jeans. At that moment, I realized button-fly jeans were invented by someone who never planned on getting laid. Stop. He rubbed his chin, his voice firm. Why don't you sit down, and we'll try this again. I immediately obeyed. Bossy alpha for the win. I hoped. He hadn't asked me to get naked first, so it was 50-50 at this point. I closed my eyes, willing him to come over and kiss me, trying to wrangle my dream and make it go where I wanted. If I was going to dream of naked men, damn it, I was going to get off doing it. Open your eyes. He spoke soft and low. Did you not see me before? I saw you, and I don't know why my mind went there, but it's my crazy dream, so I let out a huff. Actually, I have no idea. I was a bunny, and now I'm human. Yep. I know. If this dream wasn't going anywhere fun, I might as well go back to sleep and wake up for real. Go to bed, bunny man. And just like that, he was my bunny again. And fuck if I wasn't going to at least hold his sorry butt. For all I knew, the little bugger was gone forever, and maybe this was my subconscious way of saying good bye. Shit. That sucked. I loved that little furball and had no idea what I was going to say to Xander. Especially after he just lost his dog in the most cruel way ever. I got up and slowly walked toward my little friend. Hey, bunny. I missed you. I held out my hand and he hopped over, tickling my finger with his nose as soon as he could reach me. Don't scare me like that again. I scooped him up and snuggled him close. I promised to buy you a real bed soon, none of that cardboard box stuff. I just didn't think you'd want one of those outside hutches. I know I should let you go, but I can't. It's like you're my best friend. I know that's weird, but there it is. He nuzzled in close and licked my chin before hopping out of my arms. Once he was back on the floor, he became Jase again. I'm still here. I always was. He sat down beside me. I wanted to be able to say goodbye. I felt silly pouting, but I couldn't help it. You don't have to say goodbye. Not yet, anyway. I'm Bunny. He crossed his fingers over his heart and held them there. Promise. Fine, if you're Bunny, how did you come to be mine? I swerved slightly so I could look at him as he spoke. That's a loaded question. How about I just tell you how I got here? Does that work? Sure. I was driving to my stupid new job and pulled over to stretch my legs. I already knew this part, but I was captivated. I couldn't wait to find out what my imagination came up with for the rest of the story. He held my gaze as if making sure I was paying attention. So, I decided to hop around, being a rabbit shifter and all. Hold up. What was that last part? You're telling me your parents are bunnies? No, it's recessive. He held up his hand to stop me. But let me get to the part about the fox. I was attacked because I wasn't paying attention to my surroundings. But then these huge ass dogs came out of nowhere and scared the fox away, and their human, Xander, scooped me up and brought me here. If you're a shifter, why didn't you shift and heal your wounds? I'd read that someplace, I think. Not that I needed to be arguing with a dream. I was too weak. A real rabbit would have died. I'd wondered more than once why he hadn't. Yeah, that part makes sense. Well, today I was well enough to try shifting, but you came home and found me naked before I could shift back. But Bunny was here then, I countered, setting my hand on his thigh cause I really wanted to. No, you mumbled to me like I was, but it was actually just a pile of towels. He leaned in close. How can I prove to you I'm real? That this is all real? I'm not sure you can. Before I could say anything else, he kissed me and took away every doubt I had about whether I was awake or dreaming.
Chapter 12. Jase. The second my lips touched his, I could feel the pull between us. It was like a magnet to iron. As soon as the distance between us was closed, my whole body connected to his, and I couldn't tear myself away. I only leaned into the kiss as a brief distraction to prove to Augie that I wasn't some kind of figment of his nocturnal imagination. I figured a quick peck might be enough of a shock to get him focused on reality so I could explain what was going on. But as soon as we merged, there was no way I could explain anything at all. All reason and thoughts and logic left my mind, and the only word I could conjure through the haze of lust was mate. My mate. My tongue gently swept across the seam of his soft lips, and he instinctively opened for me, inviting me to taste his sweetness and seeking me out in return. The moan that escaped from deep in my chest wasn't intentional. My whole body was acting on primal needs that were inherent to who I was. The animal within me, no matter how docile it seemed in normal situations, was wailing and thrashing and begging me to give him what he wanted. And he wanted Augie. Almost as much as I did. We both pulled back for air at the same time as Augie's eyes were just starting to focus. I don't understand. I smiled and kissed the tip of his nose. I'm not entirely sure I do either. So, I'm not crazy. He said the words slowly as if trying to convince himself it was okay to ask such a thing. Or am I? My grin grew wider as I pulled him against my chest. Maybe a little, but not about this. So you're a bunny? His head was resting on my shoulder, and he didn't pull away. I wondered if he was as afraid of the answer as I was of giving it. Yeah. He chest inflated on an inhale but didn't constrict for several long seconds. Are you okay with that? Augie finally blew out a slow breath and pulled back to look me in the eyes. I don't care as much about the bunny thing as that other thing I just felt. His eyes darted down to my chest, then he looked up at me again. What was that? Playing games wasn't really my style, but I couldn't tell him the truth. I was 99% sure I knew what was happening between us, but I was afraid that if I laid too much on Augie at once, he might hate me. Or worse, he would send me away. If I was right about the mate link between us, I wouldn't survive being turned away. I'm not sure. He narrowed his eyes as if he didn't fully believe me, but he had other questions for me. Well, what about your injury? He stepped back so he could get a good look at me. When his gaze landed below my belt, his eyes got big and his breath hitched. You look amazing. Humility wasn't one of my personality traits, so I smirked and subtly flexed my abs. Thanks. I work out. The joke was sorta meant to ease some of the tension in the room, but it mostly just distracted August from appreciating my body. I mean, you're not hurt as a man. What about your bunny? Is he still hurting? Nope. I started picking up our discarded clothes, and we quietly got dressed as I worked out some kind of explanation that wasn't a lie but that wouldn't lead him to asking any more questions I wasn't ready to answer. We're both 100% strong and healthy, thanks to you. Oh, okay. His brows furrowed and he seemed to be contemplating so many things at once. The confused expression on Augie's face was too adorable for me to ignore, so I leaned forward and kissed him again. I mean it, Augie. Thank you. Augie. His lips curled up in a shy smile. I like it. Me too. I reached for his hand and waited for him to grab mine. Any chance we can make a sandwich while we talk? I'm starving. I took a huge bite of the BLT Augie made for me, then took a full minute to slowly chew and appreciate how delicious meat could be. Eating raw veggies for days made me miss the savory bounty of happiness that only bacon could provide. As soon as I washed down the bite with a gulp of beer, I was able to process all that Augie had told me. So you think Doc knows what's going on between us? Well, I'm not sure about that. Augie shrugged, and his cheeks looked slightly flushed. But I think he does know you're a shifter, and he specifically asked me to bring you by to see him, so, I think we should go. I took another bite and kept my gaze locked on Augie's. He was so pretty. Just looking at him made me starving for more than just food. I wanted him so damn bad. But it wasn't the time to think that way. I didn't know if this Doc character was a threat or not. How do you know it's not a trap? Trap for what? He popped a carrot in his mouth and chewed loudly. Apparently, he wasn't sick of rabbit food. Did you do something illegal? Well, no. I didn't really have a good reason for not visiting this Doc guy other than the fact that he was a stranger and I had an inherent distrust in strangers. If I were one of the apex shifters, I wouldn't fear anyone or anything. But as a bunny, I was vulnerable in my animal form and needed to be careful who I trusted with my secret. But I don't like to go around advertising that I turn into a 2-pound bunny in my spare time. Augie reached across the table and rested his hand on mine. We can trust Doc. My gram said he was good people, and she knew people. Please. I couldn't say no to Augie, no matter how much I wanted to. Besides, I needed to figure out how to get my car and clothes back. Yeah, okay. We can head out in the morning.
Chapter 13. August. I woke up to the purring of Lux at my door, which was odd to say the least. He rarely came inside, and when he did, it was to find Grams, not me. I'm coming, silly cat. I sat up, stretching my arms with a big yawn. I picked up my phone and saw it was 10:30. No wonder he was at my door. Breakfast time had come and gone. Shit. I popped out of bed and threw some clothes on. I'd considered just getting up after Jase and I had our talk, figuring a few hours of sleep wouldn't be worth it. But then as I lay in bed, my mind started racing with all that had happened, and 1 hour of sleep became many until I slept through my alarm. But who could blame me? I still couldn't wrap my head around that kiss, how it completely owned me. Which was ridiculous given the man had turned into my freaking pet before my eyes. By any logic on this planet, that should have been the confusing part, but somehow, it wasn't. Little bits of things Grams had told me started to fall into place as I tried to sleep. This town is different. Treat the animals the way you would want to be treated because you never know. When she said silly things like that, I didn't question what she meant. But now I couldn't help wondering just how much she had known all along. I opened the door, and if anyone had witnessed the action, they'd have thought Lux loved me more than anything. You're not fooling me, little one. I reached down and picked him up. I know you're only being sweet for the food. I already fed him. Jase stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee in his hands. He held the cup out for me. What time did you get up? I grabbed the cup and looked at Lux apologetically, setting her down in favor of the liquid energy. I couldn't sleep. I had a lot on my mind. Lux ran straight to Jase and bumped his leg with his head. I guess he's mad about the coffee. I'm not. I took a long sip, and it was perfect. Is this how you take yours? Nah, I'm a black no sugar kind of guy, but I saw you make it every morning, so, he shrugged and glanced at me. I thought I could help you feed the animals, and then we could go see document. Or I could arrange a house call. His smile was agreement enough, so we went to work while we waited for Doc to come visit. We'd barely finished as he drove up the dirt drive. This is Doc. I won't say anything about bunnying out, but I think you can trust him. I gave Jase's shoulder a squeeze and walked to where Doc was parking his car. Hey, Doc. Thanks for coming. My friend is over there. I pointed to Jase as he walked toward us, still holding the hay fork. I knew it. Doc beamed with obvious recognition in his eyes. I knew I sent Shifter on you the other day. He leaned in as Jase approached. And you were going to buy the man a hutch. He shook his head and chuckled at the idea. I didn't know he was a man then. How could I have known? Jase looked Doc up and down, then gave a nod. Otter. Bunny. Doc nodded with a small smile. Great. I was witnessing some kind of supernatural pissing match. Human, I chimed in, trying to be funny but falling horribly short of that goal if the two wide-eyed stares were any indication. Jase is the one with the abandoned car. I cleared my throat to change the vibe and get them to stop staring at me. Were you trapped in rabbit form? Doc asked, looking at Jase from head to toe. Or were you here for your mate? Mate? Sure, we kissed, but we hadn't had sex. Did we look like people who'd had sex? And why would it matter if we did? We were both freaking adults. Let me rephrase. Why did you abandon your car? We decided to take the conversation inside with a cup of tea, the way Grams would have done. Turned out, Doc even had a favorite cup in the pantry. Jase told his story and I told mine while Doc listened attentively, asking clarifying questions where he thought they were needed. You're in a pickle. Doc crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back. Sheriff Martin is kind of an asshat, and he's gonna want to know where you've been. I don't see you being able to just deal with Ron on this one. Him, I trust. And so did Lux, so that worked for me. Can you help with that? Write a note maybe? Asking for a doctor's note felt weird, but I couldn't think of anything else. I can go with you, and we can work this out. He took a sip of his tea and relaxed even more. Apparently, he meant it some time in the future. Is your clan here? Jase added milk and sugar to his tea, making it the exact opposite of his coffee. Doc grabbed the tin of cookies that lived on the table and opened them up. They weren't homemade like the days of my Grams, but I couldn't bring myself to ever let it go empty. No. There are a lot of shifters in this town, but no clans. We're mostly a town of rogues, but not completely. I had no idea what he meant by that, but I just nodded along as if I did. Are Xander and his dad shifters? Nope, Clarence is just an animal, not a shifter. Clarence, so that was his name. I reached in my memories to recall if Grams had mentioned him but came up blank. I worry about Xander. A lot. I do too, and believe me, I'm working on it. It just takes time. If we were in a pack or a clan, things would be much easier. Jase sighed heavily. I cocked my head, unsure what he meant. How so? We'd kill him, they both stated matter-of-factly. It sounded like I had a lot to learn about shifters.
Chapter 14, Jase. I had never had good luck with otters, but Doc was pretty cool. It was clear he cared about Augie and wanted the best for him, which seemed to translate into him wanting the best for me. And it was nice. I hadn't had a lot of strong male role models in my life, and it felt good to know someone truly had my back. The feeling wasn't quite so warm and fuzzy when Sheriff Martin came by the next day. I could see why Doc didn't trust him. There was just something about him that oozed slimy. I had no doubt he was one of those guys who became a sheriff for the power. He probably had a tiny dick. He immediately railed into me like I was a serial killer. No matter how many times I said I got lost in the woods and couldn't remember much about what had happened, he glared at me and scribbled notes that made me worry for Augie's safety. I knew I could handle whatever shit this backwoods asshole tried to throw at me, but when he noticed the electrical tape holding a light fixture together as he passed the mudroom, made a comment about not being sure if the old house was up to code. Augie tried to keep his cool, but the color immediately drained from his cheeks and I knew he was intimidated by the bastard. So, where is my car now? I stood on the top step of the porch as the sheriff strutted back to his vehicle. Can I ride with you to pick it up? He shook his head but didn't turn back until he was standing outside the door of his cruiser. It's in the impound yard. They open at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Take cash. Cash. I suddenly realized how screwed I actually was. My wallet's in my car, and I don't know if I have a lot of cash in it. Don't they take cards? The old guy smiled, but it looked more like a snarl. Cash only, kid. And the daily rate isn't cheap, so don't wait much longer or it won't be worth picking it up. We aren't in the city. Riverview Township doesn't do that fancy shit. Fucker, Augie whispered from behind me. I couldn't hold back a smile as I watched the guy plop into his car. Yep. He is. Don't worry about the money. We can hit the bank on the way there and I'll pull out cash. It's fine. No, I turned toward Augie and reached for his hand. I can't let you do that. I have money. I just need to figure out how to access it without my phone or wallet. He waved away my objections. You can pay me back later. It's really okay. I hated being in debt to anyone, but this was a very temporary loan. As soon as I had my car and my wallet, we were going right back to the bank to replace every penny he loaned me. I'd even buy him lunch to cover the interest. $938 later, I'd covered all the random fees and completed the pile of paperwork necessary to get my car back, and then I followed Augie to the bank. I wanted to immediately repay him, even though he insisted it wasn't necessary. But it was to me. What I was feeling for Augie wasn't just a schoolyard crush or Stockholm syndrome. In fact, every time he was more than 20 feet away from me, the ache in my belly confirmed what I'd been thinking for a while now. Augie was my mate. And as caveman as it was for me to insist on paying my way, I just couldn't allow him to waste even a single penny on me. I'd always been a little old-fashioned when it came to dating, which I attributed to my alpha genes. But the possessiveness I felt toward him was next level. Every time he furrowed his brow, I wanted to smooth it out. Every time he studied a problem, I wanted to solve it for him. And every time he looked worried, I wanted to hold him in my arms and promise everything would be okay. And the way he was chewing his lip definitely called to me for some comfort. I didn't know what was bothering him, but I didn't like it. Is this about the money? Because I promise I can cover it. Augie shook his head as if clearing it. No, it's not that. It's nothing. He nodded toward the teller when the window was available. It's your turn. I wanted to press him for the real answer, but that had to wait while I convinced the teller to pull cash out of my credit card since the daily limit on my debit card was only $500. She was nice about it, but it was embarrassing as hell to basically beg for cash like a loser. Once we were finally done at the bank, I slipped my arm behind Augie's back and walked him to the deli next door. It was a few minutes before noon, so we managed to snag a table before the real rush came in. After we ordered sandwiches and cokes, I crossed my arms over my chest and stared right at Augie, pinning him in place with just my gaze. So, spill it. What? His eyes darted from my face to my shirt and back before finally releasing a deep breath and sinking back into his chair. I'm just worried about you. Me? That would be comical if he wasn't so genuinely upset. What could possibly make you worry about me? He shrugged one shoulder and let his gaze drop to his hands. The clerk called the sheriff when you went out back to get your registration. He told him you were there and it sounded like they were conspiring or something. I reached across the table for Augie's hand and gave it a squeeze. I'm flattered that you're concerned, but I haven't done anything wrong, so there's no reason to be worried about cops. There's nothing for them to bother us with. Augie's eyebrows shot up and he gave me a pointed look. Well, there is one thing that you probably don't want him to know about. My rabbit? Augie frantically looked around the crowded restaurant to see if I was heard. Shush. Do you want to end up in some kind of laboratory? God, he was adorable. Lots of people have rabbits, Augie. There's nothing wrong with that. He thought about it for a minute but then finally let it go. Yeah, I guess you're right. I know I'm right. I smiled and winked just as a smoky voice startled us both. What are you right about, boy? What? We both looked up into the beady eyes of the sheriff. Oh, nothing. He nodded and turned his full attention to me. I might need to talk to you about something that happened in the woods a few days ago. Where will you be staying while you're in our fine town? I glanced at Augie to see what he would say, but his mouth was already open before I could even come up with an answer. He's staying with me. Indefinitely. Indefinitely. I liked the sound of that, but it surprised the hell out of me. I'd need to unpack what that actually meant later. Not in a deli with the town cop staring down at me. What happened in the woods? His eyes bored into mine as if he was looking for an answer to an unspoken question. I'll be in touch soon. Don't leave town.
Chapter 15. August. It's bullshit he's making you stick around. I poured a cup of the coffee I just brewed for Jase. We'd had a less than stellar lunch thanks to Sheriff Asshat. I wasn't even sure what the deal was with any of the law enforcement I'd met so far. The deputy and sheriff were pretty much opposites, and Officer John had managed to say 0 words since I met him. And thinking about it, Grams had said so many wonderful things about almost everyone in town, but I couldn't recall her specific comments. Maybe she thought Martin was an asshole too. I smiled at that thought. She always saw the good in people, but in reality, some people have no good in them. I had a feeling that was the case with Xander's father as well. It is, but honestly, the job I was going to is crap anyway. If I lose it, I lose it. He took the cup of hot coffee I offered him with a smile. Thanks for this. I walked around the counter to join him. If it's such a crap job, why are you traveling to take it? Of course, I had no business offering any job advice. My career wasn't exactly soaring. Because it was that or nothing. He sipped his coffee, and I was stupid jealous of the cup. What the fuck was up with that? Jealous of a cup because his lips were on it instead of me. Great, and now I was sporting a semi thinking about his lips on mine. So I got rid of all my stuff, loaded the car with the few things I needed, and took off. I think it's worked out okay so far. I raised an eyebrow in his direction. Says the man who was attacked by a wild animal, caged in a box, lost a shit ton of money getting his car back, and is possibly under investigation for who knows what. Says the man who was nursed back to health by one of the most compassionate people I've ever met, who got to hang out on the coolest farm on this planet, and who was very much not fox food. He reached over and grabbed the cookie tin, taking off the lid and setting it between us. It was such a Grams thing to do. This place just did that to a person. It was like she was still rubbing off on people. I just stared, not sure what to say to that. Wah, Jase wiggled in his seat. Daisy, what are you doing? Licking your ankles? He nodded. Daisy, how many times do I have to tell you, you are not a dog? I don't mind. He snagged a cookie. How about you? Why are you doing real estate here for somewhere else? At first, I was startled by the question. Then I remembered just how much of my life Jase had witnessed when I thought he was just a hurt animal. Well, here's the thing about real estate work, it requires peopling. And pushing people to buy things they may or may not want or need. And that's not really what I enjoy, so I worked myself into the job I have now. Kind of created it, actually, and it's been good. It pays the bills, and I can do it from here. Not forever, but for now. You like being here because of the animals? No. I mean, yes, I do love the animals, but also it feels like home. and the more time I spend here, the less sure I am I want to leave, if that makes any sense at all. I wasn't sure it did. I get it. It sounds like your grandmother was an amazing person. Right at that moment, Henrietta started honking and hissing outside the window. I hollered to her to cut it out, and she gave one long hiss and strolled away, causing a belly laugh from Jase. She was the best, even, and she treated me more like a son than my mom did. That was the sad reality of it. My mom wasn't one to shower me with love or attention, and when I came here, I was Grams's whole world, and she made sure I felt that deep down. She sounds amazing. He rubbed his chin. I never had anyone like that. I was a disgrace because, Bunny. He'd mentioned he was a recessive gene shifter. I had no idea that meant he was a disgrace. Fuck that. He was stunning in his furry form, and they could fuck off with that bullshit. A little protective, aren't we? I wish I could have met her. I wish you could have too. Not wanting to continue with the serious tone the conversation was taking, I got up and walked behind Jase, my hand grazing his shoulder along the way as I squeezed through the small space. Let's make a list of all the things in my house we think Sheriff Asshat was upset about and then see how many of them we could handle. I mean, if you don't mind. Was I overstepping? Yeah, that sounds great. I would love to. He closed the cookie tin and downed the rest of his coffee before taking both empty mugs to the sink. Did I ever tell you about the summer I worked for an electrician? You know electrical mumbo-jumbo? There were quite a few things the sheriff pointed out when he wandered through the house that fit in that category. I know enough. He smirked and shot me a wink. Damn, even when he was being cocky, he was sexy as fuck. Now let's get this list cooking. It took us 10 minutes to list out 20 things. Many we were sure were on the asshat's list, but the rest we weren't sure if he noticed. Thankfully, most were easy fixes, and by the time evening fell, we had half of them done and a list of supplies needed to complete the rest. Jase and I were quite a team. A team destined to split apart and live on opposite sides of the country, where neither of us would be doing what we wanted in life. What a pair we were. No, not a pair. Two men just trying to find their way in life who happened to be at the same place for a short while. That had to be enough. Why didn't it feel like enough?
Chapter 16. Jase. For the next 2 days, we worked on the house and took care of the animals, ignoring the intense connection we felt when we touched. As much as I wanted to jump his bones every time I passed by him, I tried to keep a wall up that would protect my heart when it was time to leave. He'd used the word indefinitely when we were talking to the sheriff, but that was just to protect me. It worked in the moment, but it wouldn't protect my heart. If I let myself get too close, I'd never recover from having to leave him, especially with the mate link I was sure we had. It wasn't something I truly believed was possible, but as the days went on, I was growing more and more certain that's what we were. Mates. On Friday night, I didn't put away my tools until almost 10. And it took every ounce of strength in me to stay upright during my shower. As soon as I'd rinsed off, I dropped into bed from sheer exhaustion and went right to sleep. I might have slept through the day if not for the sound of Augie screaming out for me just as day was breaking. I heard a muffled sound that jarred me from my sleep, but when he clearly yelled for me, I jumped out of bed and ran across the hall to his bedroom. The door wasn't closed all the way, so there wasn't any sound to alert him to the fact that I was in his room. But when I saw his naked form in the center of his bed with his fist wrapped around his cock and his eyes screwed shut in anguish, I wasn't sure what to do. He didn't seem to be in pain, but he was obviously desperate for something. Augie. I stepped closer to him and the thick scent of his arousal wafted off his body in heavy waves. My whole body swayed for a second while I garnered control of the moment. Are you okay? Jase, please. His fist stroked his dick furiously as he writhed against the sheet. I can't wait any longer. I need you. Shit. I liked to believe I was a strong man, but even the strongest alpha in the world wouldn't be able to resist the erotic scene unfolding in front of me. Augie, I'm here. His head turned toward me but his eyes didn't open. You came. You'll take care of me. Was he trying to kill me? I reached down and brushed a clump of hair off his sweaty forehead. I will, baby. Open your eyes. Augie exhaled deeply, then slowly opened his eyes. It took a few seconds for him to really focus on me and realize where he was and what he was doing. What's going on? I shrugged and took a step back. I think you were having a dream. He smiled and let his eyes drift shut before opening them again. I was. It was amazing. He looked down and realized none of his covers were on his body, and he immediately covered his cock with his hands. I'm sorry. Did I do something? I smiled and tried to convince myself to walk out the door, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. What I needed more than anything was to feel his body against mine, even just once. You called out for me. He nodded but kept his gaze locked with mine. You were in my dream. You said you needed me. I trailed my fingertips along his ribs and down toward his groin. Do you? Yes. He didn't hesitate at all. So badly. I knew it was stupid, but I couldn't stop myself from yanking off my boxers and covering his naked body with mine. It felt so good to have his skin touch me from chest to thighs, and when I brushed his lips with mine, I thought I might come on the spot. What started out as a sweet and gentle kiss quickly morphed into mouth sex that was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. My alpha needed to dominate Augie, and I needed to connect with my mate in the most intimate way possible. After several long moments, I pulled away to look down at him as I gently slid my cock along his, loving the velvety feel of his hard flesh against mine. I need you too, baby. But we have to be careful. Careful why? Augie gripped both of my shoulders with his palms, then slowly rubbed a trail of heat down my arms and between our bodies until he was holding our shafts together. I can take you. I moaned loudly and threw my head back. Why was he so fucking hot? It would be much easier to be a gentleman if he wasn't so adorable. I don't want you to get pregnant, that's why. Augie's whole body stilled and his eyes went wide. For a moment, I wondered if he wasn't familiar with the concept of men becoming pregnant, since it wasn't common among non-shifters. But his look wasn't out of shock or not understanding. It was more curious. Yeah, of course. Just don't nut me. I nodded and adjusted my weight so I could lower my cock into position at his wet opening. I just want to feel you for a few minutes, and then I'll pull out. Augie tilted his pelvis to give me better access, and within the span of a single breath, I pressed into him until I was fully seated with my balls against his ass. He sighed heavily with a satisfied smile on his face. Yes, Jase. That's what I need. I took that as permission to keep going, so I planted my elbows into the mattress and used my upper body strength to keep my weight off Augie while I methodically thrust in and out of him in long strokes. Augie's body immediately responded to mine and his hand went back to work on his cock, stroking and teasing it while he eagerly fucked me from the bottom. Feelings of affection and lust mixed together to create something I'd never before experienced. Something deep and intense between us that was both private and worthy of shouting from a loudspeaker. He was mine, and I was about to fill him with my seed to prove it. Shit. I pulled fully out of his hole and lowered myself so I could take his cock into my mouth. Before he could protest about me leaving him so close to the edge, I licked along the head of his perfect cock and then sucked him fully into my mouth until he was pressed against my tonsils. Jase, I'm gonna come. His fingers curled into my hair, and he gave a weak tug but gave up when I didn't release the suction I had on his shaft. I hummed against him, letting the vibrations from my mouth ease him closer to his release. Yes, Jase. I need it. Just like that. He thrust deeper down my throat and released a hot load into me before pulling back enough to leave a second dollop on my tongue. I sucked in a deep breath through my nostrils because I didn't want to lessen the grip my lips had on his oozing tip. He tasted too damn good, and I wanted every drop. Sucking and then teasing his slit with my tongue resulted in a third shot filling my mouth while I savored his flavor. He smiled and combed my hair with his fingers as he relaxed beneath me like a blob of jello. Is right. That was so good. I finally gave his tip a final suck before letting it slip out of my mouth. Agreed. Augie took in a few cleaning breaths before planting his hands on my chest and pushing me onto my back beside him. Now it's your turn. Like I could say no to that.
Chapter 17. August. A week passed and we fell into a kind of normalcy. During the day, I took care of the animals and Jase started working on the long list we came up with on the house, bringing the standards as close to code as we could get on our own. And as evening fell, we'd share a meal together and end the night sweaty and panting. On the surface, everything was perfect. But just beneath that lay the inevitability that Jase was leaving and I'd be alone again. Only this time, my heartbreak wouldn't be over the death of a family member. This time, I would be mourning in an endless cycle of what-ifs. What if he had stayed? What if I'd gone with him? What if we could have been more? I'm going to make some lunch. Jase put the toolbox down on the table with a clank. I'm so hungry I could eat the asshole out of a skunk. My grandmother used to say that, and it is just as gross coming from you as it was coming from her. I saved my file and shut my laptop. I can make lunch. You've been working hard all day. You should get something cold to drink. He'd been building a new pen for a lamb that was being dropped off on the weekend. The poor thing was recuperating at the vet's place after getting hit by a car after someone had abandoned it. He raised an eyebrow at me. You've been working too. While sitting on my ass the whole time. I seriously hated my job. Even sitting around was exhausting. I stood up, yawning. See? You're tired. I'll make lunch. He closed the distance between us, standing so close I could feel his breath against my cheek. Or we could start with dessert. I wasn't stupid. Dessert sounds delight. August. The sound of Xander calling me broke the spell between us and we snapped apart, my heart racing. Please don't let his other dog be dead. Just a second. I jogged out of the house to see Xander standing there wearing a hoodie, his hands in the center pocket and his eyes sunken in. The kid needed sleep, and from the looks of it, some better nutrition. Hey. It's good to see you. I smiled up at him, but his eyes looked past me. Who's he? He nodded his head to indicate Jase, who was standing behind me. This is my friend, Jase. I held my hand out for Jase to take so Xander could see he wasn't a threat. He's helping me around the farm. So you're keeping it? His hopeful eyes spoke volumes about how he really felt. Yeah, if I can figure out how. Saying it out loud for the first time just felt right. It's what my Grams wanted. Jase squeezed my hand in support of my decision. That's awesome. Xander twisted his foot in the dirt, forming a little indent. I was hoping to see my rabbit if she's okay. He's fine, Jase answered for me. Did he forget there wasn't actually a rabbit to be seen? I gotta go do a thing. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. Can you grab Bunny for him because I have that thing? Yeah. Okay. Go do that thing. I want to show Xander where the new baby lamb is going anyway. I led Xander to the pen and told him all about the lamb coming to live with us. You should stop by and see it when it comes. I like lambs. I went on a field trip, and we got to Cardwool. It was fun, I mean, not if I had to do it all the time like the olden days, but it was field trip fun. He bent down, giving Daisy a scratch behind the ear. She'd been following him since I got off the porch. Silly pig. So that guy your boyfriend? Gotta love kids and their bluntness. Ish. It was the most honest response I had. Jase was leaving so we couldn't be anything more than ish. And that sucked because every day, every hour, I found something more to like about him. When Xander asked about Bunny, we could have said 1,000 things to explain his disappearance. Anything from saying he died from his injuries to claiming he was released into the wild, or maybe that he was perfect and his owner had claimed him. But no, Jase snuck away to take his fur and let the boy not only see his bunny, but to pet and hold him. Who does that? Someone with a huge heart, that's who. Too bad. He seems nice. Yeah, he is. Now, let's go see your bunny. We walked back to the house, and I gave him instructions along the way about not holding him too tightly and all that jazz, because as sweet and compassionate as the boy was, he was still young. And that was my ish he was going to be holding. Here he is. I found Bunny waiting at the door as soon as we opened it. He must have heard you coming. Xander bent down and carefully scooped him up. How are you, little guy? He pet his head. Why don't you sit on the porch with him, and I'll make lunch? Jase deserved a gourmet meal for doing this. Unfortunately for him, he was going to have to settle for grilled cheese and canned tomato soup. I have to go back soon, but I can sit for 5 minutes. He went outside and settled on the step. Damn his father for being such a cruel fucker. If only there were more I could do. I just had to trust Doc. Sheriff Martin sure as shit wasn't going to be any help, and I couldn't trust that I'd be able to get through to Deputy Ron. If he'd given me his number instead of the number to dispatch, that would have helped. You sure he won't hop away? Nah, I trained him well. I was going to pay for that one. Maybe I could get a spanking out of it. Xander quietly cuddled the bunny as I cooked, then brought him back in just as the sandwiches were done. I gotta go. His eyes fell and so did his demeanor. Thanks for the visit. Want a sandwich to go? Even as I asked, I was already bundling up too for the road. Really? His face lit up in disbelief. You mean it? Absolutely. And you can come back anytime. Soon, because Jase is in love with Bunny, so he might take him when he goes. But I'm sure the new lamb would love the company. I'll be sad if he leaves, but at least he'll be going to a good home and not a fox's den. He took the sandwiches I held out for him. Thanks for these and Bunny and everything. I sighed as I watched the kid take off toward his home. He's gone, I said into the air as I looked out the window. Xander's got a good head on his shoulders. Jase's voice startled me even though it shouldn't have. He seems to. I turned around and saw Jase standing buck, ass naked, and I took a moment to soak in his gloriousness. Thanks for that. It meant a lot to him. It was the least I could do. He shrugged. So, are we getting back to dessert now that our sandwiches are gone? They weren't. I made extra, but we both pretended that wasn't the case. I could use some dessert. Maybe some afternoon delight? Needless to say, we ate our grilled cheese cold. It was delicious.
Chapter 18, Jase. Life with Augie was pretty great. So great that I was starting to imagine what things would be like if I never left. I was able to fix up a good chunk of the problems we identified, and with each swing of my hammer, it was easier to think of the farm as my home. Or more accurately, that being with Augie was my home. And then reality knocked. Technically, it was the sheriff who knocked on the door at 8:05 Wednesday morning. Augie and I were just getting out of the shower after a satisfying morning of playtime when the banging at the front startled us both. Augie opened up the bedroom window and shouted out toward the door. Coming. Just a minute. Are you expecting anyone? I stepped into a pair of jeans then reached for a t-shirt. It was Augie's shirt so it fit snugly against my chest, but I liked having his scent on me. My bunny liked that too. No, Augie grinned when he looked at me and then picked up my shirt off the chair. It was baggy on his slight frame, but he was bulking up from all his work on the farm. He looked damn good in it. I'll be right back. I followed on his heels, curious to know who was making an unannounced visit so early, but also desperate for a cup of coffee. When Augie opened the door and Sheriff Martin was standing on the other side, my heart sank. I knew what he was there for. Either he had manufactured some reason to arrest me or he was planning to run me out of town. I wasn't sure which sounded worse. Not until the actual words left his lips and I was faced with the reality I'd been avoiding for weeks. Nothing came up on our investigation, so you're free to leave. The sheriff stared me down, trying to intimidate me. It didn't work. Thank you, sir. I'll keep that in mind. Augie sighed heavily, obviously relieved. I wasn't eager to leave quite yet. We had a lot of work left to do, and I don't think either of us was ready to end whatever connection was building between us. I winked at him, reassuring him I felt the same way. I don't think you understand what I'm saying, boy. Sheriff Martin slipped his thumbs into the wide waistband of his trousers and tugged them up as he rocked back on his heels. It's not a suggestion. Augie and I both turned to him with slack jaws. In my gut, I knew what he was saying, but I needed to hear him say the words out loud in order for them to sink in. What are you talking about? The heavy-set man pulled his hands along his belt until they were resting on his weapons. It's time for you to get moving. We don't need your kind of riff-raff around these parts. We're good people here, not looking for any trouble. He eyed me from head to toe and scoffed. And I knew from the second I saw you that you were trouble. I reached for Augie and tugged him closer so we could hold each other up. I knew this day was going to suck when it came, but I didn't think it would come so soon. And I definitely didn't expect the dread to be as intense as it was. Yes, sir. I understand. I don't understand. Augie pulled away and balled up his fists on his hips. Why does Jase have to leave? He's helping me. Sheriff Martin pulled his evil gaze away from me and leveled it on Augie. I had to stop myself from standing in front of him to shield him from the asshole sheriff, but I didn't want to make things worse for Augie. He would be stuck seeing that man for as long as he lived in the town. I, on the other hand, would be a distant memory soon enough. Maybe it was better this way. It's okay, August. I need to head out anyway. Maybe I'll still be able to take that job. That's what I like to hear. The sheriff nodded to both of us, then walked off the porch, no doubt on his way to ruin someone else's life. When he got to his vehicle, he paused and looked back up at us both. I trust you'll be gone by noon, so I don't have to come back and remove you. Before I could say anything in response, he was tearing off the property in a cloud of dust. We both stood there for several minutes, not sure what to do next. Finally, Augie broke the silence. So, you're just gonna leave? They can't make you leave if you don't want to. You haven't done anything wrong. I pulled him against my chest and rested my chin on his shoulder. I know, but that doesn't mean I won't be prosecuted for doing something wrong just because they want me gone. So that's it? No reason to fight? I knew what he was asking, but I couldn't say what he wanted me to say. I couldn't tell him that I was starting to fall for him and I'd happily live on that farm for the rest of my life if it meant getting to have Augie by my side that entire time. It's better this way, baby. I've had fun here, but I need to get going to my real life now. His breath shuddered, but he maintained his composure. After a series of calming breaths, he nodded against my cheek, then pulled away. Well, let's get some breakfast in you, and then I'll make you some sandwiches for the road while you pack. You've got a long drive ahead of you, and you're burning daylight. Sounds good. I swallowed hard to hold back the emotion that was starting to bubble up within me. Come on. Let's see if that delicious smell coming from the kitchen is hot coffee. Augie nodded without a word and led me into the kitchen. He forced a brave face as he poured us 2 cups, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. I wasn't sure if it was because I seemed eager to leave or because he thought I should stand up for myself with the asshole sheriff. Either way, I hated that look of sadness and needed to get out of town as soon as possible. If I was stuck staring at those big eyes for any length of time, there'd be no chance of me leaving.
Chapter 19. August. He left. Just like that. He left. And I let him. I sat up in my bed, stretching my arms with a yawn. Lux was curled up with me, something he never did before Jase left. That afternoon I watched him drive away. I crawled into bed and sobbed until I fell asleep. When I woke up, Lux was there and he'd been there every night since. Silly cat. Or maybe not silly. Maybe he got it. In a way, I was mourning. Not the same as when Grams died, of course, but the death of a relationship, if we could even call it that, hurt. Mourning Lux. I reached over and scratched behind his ears. You crashed here again, I see. He began to purr. I appreciate it, you know. He stood up on his 3 feet and bounded off the bed. Snuggling time was officially over. I had approximately 15 minutes until he began to cry at his food bowl. I padded off to the bathroom for a quick shower. There was a lot on my plate for the day, between taking care of the animals and a scheduled meeting with my boss. I made the decision to stay at the farm after all. It was my home and selling it just felt wrong. So wrong that any time I thought about it, I felt sick. Or maybe thinking about being someplace Jase couldn't find me was what actually made me sick. Either way, I was staying. This was my home. I hear you, I called to Lux as I pulled my shirt over my head after a hot shower. I'm coming. I took 3 steps and ended up hunched over the toilet, losing what little remained in my belly of dinner the night before. Great. It wasn't just my emotions. I was actually sick. By the time I cleaned up and got to the kitchen, Lux was actively attempting to open his food bin. I said I was coming. I rolled my eyes at the little furball. Here. I'll even give you some extra. I poured his kibble and started to make a pot of coffee, quickly realizing how dumb that was, and settling for a cup of mint tea. I'm off to feed everyone else. I'll be back in a bit. I headed out to do the chores, which took twice as long as they should have. I was dragging and barely got back in time for my meeting. I didn't even have time to change. Oh well. They knew I was living on a farm, so no one was expecting Gucci. Mr. Williams. I sat up straight as soon as we both connected to the video call. August, you look like you're fitting right in? It came out as a question, and had I not known him, I'd have thought it was an insult. Are you calling to say you'll be back soon? It's challenging to work this way. Brilliant. I took a deep breath. Sir, good to see you too. I hit send on the file I had prepared for the meeting. I have a proposal I think might work for both of us. Please, let it work at least until I can find something local that will pay the bills. Which means what exactly? He was silent, staring at the machine in a way that indicated he was reading the document. Each subtle facial expression increased my anxiety tenfold. I see. Is that a yes, sir? If it wasn't, it would suck to be jobless. He shook his head. I don't like it. I understand. Fuck. But my work does help the agency bring in more money. True. He scratched his chin and heaved a heavy sigh. It's not ideal, and I'm not saying yes, but how about we try it for 45 days with you really committing to making it work? That was a dick way of saying he thought I could do more than I already was. And then we'll reevaluate. Sounds great. It didn't. It sounded awful. I didn't want to do twice the work for the same pay just to prove myself worthy, but it bought me some desperately needed time. He cleared his throat and rocked back in his expensive leather chair. Now let's talk salary. By the time I got off the call, I was making 3/4 of my former salary, losing my insurance because of some out-of-state bullshit clause, and had to keep a daily time sheet. It sucked, but it was my only option. I stood up, and the nausea came back in full force. It was only lunchtime, but I didn't care. I climbed back into bed and took a power nap. A power nap that wound up being 3 hours long. Fortunately, I felt a bit better when I woke up, so I checked on the animals and decided to go into town. There was a small real estate office on the main street, and I wanted to see if they might be a place worth dropping off my resume at. I parked at the diner and ordered my dinner to go, then meandered down the street as they cooked it. The real estate agency was everything I expected it to be. An older home with a wraparound porch and listings taped to the windows. From what little I could tell, it was a family business, so I probably couldn't offer them much unless they were desperate. Without having to pay rent, I didn't need to make too much. It was at least something to think about while I rode out the next 45 days. Looking to sell the place? Doc startled me. Hey, Doc. Nah. Just seeing what the place was like. That's my job, sort of, real estate. I mean, I mostly do the tech stuff. I stepped off the porch, not wanting to shout at him when he was right there. Congratulations. He hugged me. Doc. Hugged. Me. Thanks, but what are you talking about? I took a huge step back, needing a little bit of space. Oh. Shit. He bit his bottom lip and gave me a sheepish grin. You don't know yet, do you? Know what? My stomach started to knot, wondering what he might possibly mean. You're pregnant. You and Jase are going to be dads. He clapped my shoulder and looked genuinely happy for us. Me. Only me since I was all alone. I just stared. It only took him a second to register that I was in shock. Want to go to my office and talk? I nodded, then followed him to my car. I almost forgot to pick up my food, the food I no longer even wanted to smell, before I drove the short distance to his office. You had no idea? He opened my car door as I turned off the ignition. None. Not even a hint. I'd been blaming everything on Jase leaving me with a broken heart, not once considering any other option. Let's get you inside, and we can figure this out. Unless you want to wait until Jase gets here. Jase is gone. It came out as a choked whisper. He sighed and wrapped an arm around my back. Then let's go figure some things out, shall we? I followed him into the building without a word. At least I wasn't completely alone.
Chapter 20. Jase. Supply chain coordinator sounded impressive in theory. And really, it wasn't hard work. It was actually kind of fun to organize the suppliers and the orders and mix and match until all the right parts were sent to all the right manufacturers at all the right times. But nothing in my life actually felt right. I woke up, mindlessly showered, dressed, and made coffee. Then I drove to work on autopilot and worked my ass off to stay distracted. But 5 o'clock rolled around every evening, and when it did, all bets were off. I was a fucking mess. Not only did I hate the situation I was in, but my bunny hated me for leaving Augie. He knew where we needed to be, and he was determined to get us back there. I hadn't shifted once since moving because I wasn't sure I'd be strong enough to shift back if he decided to go rogue and hop all the way back to Augie. It was the first time in my life I regretted having to share myself with someone else. My pain was intense enough. Feeling it doubled was too much to bear. Since the moment I pulled out onto the road and Augie disappeared from my rearview mirror, an ache had been welling up inside me. It started in my chest and extended out to every finger and toe. Even my eyes felt gritty from rubbing them so much. If I didn't know better, I'd think I was allergic to my new town. But I did know better, and I knew exactly what was wrong with me. Alphas weren't meant to be separated from their mates for any length of time, and certainly not by any significant distance. With every mile that I drove farther away from Augie, the invisible tether he'd unconsciously wrapped around my heart grew tighter and tighter. Most of the time, I wasn't sure I'd be able to take another breath. And when I wasn't gasping for the relief that only proximity to Augie could provide, I was trying like hell to forget about it. That seemed like the only way I'd be able to survive without it. For a few days it worked. I even passed the 1-week milestone without picking up my phone and calling just to hear his voice. But by the time a second week was closing in on me, I knew I couldn't last without some professional help. So I called in the only professional I knew that might be able to help. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. "Doc, here. Can I put you on hold for a minute?" Yeah. Sure." He seemed busy, and I felt bad for intruding on his time, but I was at the end of my rope. If he couldn't help, I wasn't sure what I'd do. Several minutes passed before he picked up the phone and sighed into it. "Sorry about that. What can I do for you?" "Doc, hi. It's Jase, August's friend." I realized he barely knew me and probably wouldn't be able to place me by voice alone. "Is this a good time?" "Jase, of course. I'm glad you called." "You are?" That seemed weird. Maybe he didn't know I'd left town and needed to talk to Augie about something. I'm not staying with August anymore. I moved to the coast a couple weeks ago." "Oh, I know all about that." He chuckled softly. "I'm surprised you've lasted this long. You must be a stubborn one." "What the hell did that mean?" "I'm sorry, but I don't follow." "Just come home, Jase. We both know that's what you need. Staying away any longer is just unnecessary torture for both of you." I closed my eyes and swallowed back the sudden rush of emotion I felt. "He's not doing well either." Doc scoffed at my idiocy. "Of course not. His mate left him. What do you think he's feeling right now?" If it was anything like the pain I was in, I'd never want to inflict that on my worst enemy, much less the man I loved. Damn it, why did I have to go there? I'd been doing so good. Well, trying to do good. I want to, Doc. So badly. But I can't. The sheriff basically kicked me out of town and made it clear I wasn't welcome to come back. Screw the sheriff. That miserable old coot wouldn't know a happy couple if it bit him in the ass, and if he keeps up his power plays, he's gonna be out anyway. He thinks he knows things he doesn't, and it'll be his end if he doesn't watch it. Doc just somehow managed to say a whole lot without saying anything, not that it mattered. He was giving me the advice I longed for but was too scared to even think about on my own. Just get back here, pronto. Are you sure? I thought about how hard it was to leave Augie. I wouldn't be strong enough to do it again if he didn't want me back. Augie has so much going on. He doesn't need me in his way, mooching off him. You know computers. Doc clearly wasn't good at taking no for an answer. Yeah, why? Please don't ask me to explain how email works. I just upgraded my CRM to some fancy program that meets HIPAA requirements. But it takes me forever to input all my patient files from my paper notes to the damn computer. If you don't mind reading chicken scratch, you can work for me as a data entry clerk for now, and we'll talk about a promotion to office manager once that project is finished. Seriously? I didn't know what to say. It was so much to process, but there was only one possible response. I'll be there tomorrow. I hated to leave my new boss high and dry, but I couldn't go on like I had been. And now that I knew I could go back to Augie and I had a job lined up, the 20 minutes it took to pack up and let my landlord know I was leaving felt like an eternity. Every minute I was away from Augie was an eternity. But by morning, I'd be pulling into his driveway and hopefully starting the real eternity I had always dreamed of living.
Chapter 21. August. Daisy, you have to move already. Every step I took, there was a pig in my way. Every last one. I wasn't sure what had gotten into her, but she was going to trip me if she kept it up. Please? I looked at her with my most pathetic droopy eyes, and by some miracle, it worked. She got out of my way, kicking up her front leg as if waving me forward. You're a strange pig, Daisy. I love you, but you're a strange one. I was finishing up morning chores, only it was already afternoon. This pregnancy thing was kicking my butt. Pregnancy. I was pregnant. That still hadn't completely settled into my consciousness. It was the last thing I expected Doc to tell me when I ran into him, and a week later, I was still not altogether sure I fully believed it. We'd been so careful except that one time, and even then we were mostly careful. I could hear my biology teacher's nasally voice ringing in my mind. And remember, class, pulling out is not an effective form of birth control. Apparently, Mrs. Livingston had been right. And I couldn't even be upset that I was pregnant. I always wanted a family, and while I never expected it to happen when I had no husband, no medical insurance, a tenuous employment situation, and living in a community where I knew exactly 2 people and one was a child. No, everything about my situation was wrong, except it felt right. I walked through the gate to feed and water the horses, hoping to be done for a short while after that was taken care of. But, just like everything else, it took far longer than it should have, and I was ready for a nap by the time I walked out of the barn. I stopped long enough to pet the new lamb which was named Lamb, then closed up the gate behind me. I wasn't as creative as Grams in the naming department, that was for sure. Hello? Xander called out to me, but I couldn't tell where he was. I jogged out to the front of the house and found him standing there with a gorgeous, if not skinny, mixed breed dog. Hey, Xander. What's up? I wiped my hands on my knees and held one out to the dog who stepped forward and walked around me to Daisy. They both circled around each other until the dog rolled onto his back as if to submit to a pig. Your dog likes Daisy, I think. Yeah, Boxer and Daisy are friends, although the pig can be a little bossy if you ask me. He spoke directly to her, and I could see a bit of Grams in the boy. That made me smile. So what brings you here? I asked, still watching the dog and pig in amazement. I have a favor to ask. Well, you kinda offered, or at least I think you did. He was looking at the ground. Okay, sure. Whatever it was that had him too scared to ask had to be important enough that I would find a way to do it. He looked up at me wide-eyed. You know what I want to ask? No, but it seems like it's important. I took a step in the direction of the house. Let's get some tea and cookies, and you can tell me what you need. Are they in the tin? He asked, already walking inside after giving the dog a brief whistle to follow him. They taste better that way. Yeah, they're in the tin, but I didn't make them. They were the last of the chocolate chip cookies Jase made after finding Grams's recipe stuck in a drawer. He said he thought they would make me smile. And they did. Now they just sat there because they were too precious to eat, even though I knew that made 0 sense. They aren't even from a package. He sat on the kitchen stool as I put the kettle on and opened the tin. Jase made them. They're Grams's recipe. These are my favorite. He snatched one up and took a big bite. No, you can't have one, Boxer. The dog sat there staring up at him with big puppy eyes. Chocolate is bad for dogs. How about some cheese? I opened the refrigerator and grabbed a few slices. The poor thing obviously needed food. He likes cheese. The dog looked at Xander, who gave him a nod and then took a step closer to me, only to get cut off by Daisy. Daisy, cut that out. I took a huge step over the pig and held the cheese out to Boxer. He ate it in one bite. That's kinda what I wanted to talk to you about. Can Boxer live here for a while? He pulled out a few crumpled bills from his pocket. They were all ones from what I could see. I can pay for his boarding. Will you get in trouble with your dad? Not that I thought his father should be near any living creature, but pissing him off didn't sound like a great idea either. When he left, he told me he hated that dog. Xander rubbed the dog's head and leaned down, kissing the top of it sweetly. And I figure he'll be back today or tomorrow, so it's safer for Boxer to be here. He was so matter of fact about his shitty situation. All I wanted to do was go over there and beat the tar out of the man, but then something about his words hit me. Where's your dad? Don't know. Don't care. But he usually isn't gone more than a week, and tomorrow is a week. I made this money over the winter from shoveling, so I thought maybe. Of course he can stay. Xander looked up at me, his face brightening up as the kettle whistled. You can too, if you want. I didn't want to push, but he was way too young to be home alone, even if being alone was better than being with that horrid man. I think he'll be back tomorrow. He grabbed another cookie. Okay, but the offer stands. I have a spare room. I finished making the tea, then slid his cup over to him. I wished I knew the right thing to say, the right thing to do. I needed to call Doc. He knew things I didn't, and he had pretty much told me it would all work out. At the time, I let it go, but that was no longer enough information. I needed to know how things would work out. This poor boy needed a better life than he currently had. I'll think about it. He nibbled some more. Can I see Bunny after we're done? No. He moved with Jase. They were kind of a package deal. Xander's shoulders drooped. I miss him. I do too. More than I cared to admit. Chapter 22. August. He comes with me. Xander's father barked, his hands shaking, wrapped around his rifle. I knew he was drunk when he first came up the drive. Boxer started flipping out, Daisy ran around in circles, and Henrietta was hissing like nobody's business. Thankfully, Xander listened when I told him to run away and hide. I still wasn't sure what the fuck this man wanted, but nothing about this was good. Nothing. He's not here, I repeated the lie for the 5th time. I just needed him to leave so I could call for help. I hated the idea that Sheriff Martin was my beacon of hope, but I didn't have any other options. I tried calling Doc's number as soon as this guy got here, but he never answered. I'd envisioned him so many times as I worried about what was happening at their house. I pictured him as an older Xander with cold eyes and a haggard appearance. Standing before me was a man with zero resemblance to the boy, his hair a deep red and his eyes were cold and blue, unlike Xander's rich brown. I'd nailed the haggard part. He had been drinking for enough years that his nose had that bluish tinge that announced his addiction for all to see. That shit dog of his is here. He barked at me and the dog barked back. Boxer, go. By some miracle, he did as he was told. I just hoped he wasn't going straight to Xander. I had 2 people to keep safe, and leading the asshole to the one would be far from helpful. Good. Let that mutt get that bastard. The man's finger settled on the trigger for the first time since he arrived. If he shows up, I'll send him home. I took a tiny step to the side. I'd been doing that as often as I could, hoping to get some cover by my car if it came to that. Not that it would help for long. He had a gun, and I had nothing except my need to protect Xander and my baby. I'm not leaving without him. 10 years. Spit flew from his mouth with every word. 10 years I've been dealing with that little shit, and he's not even. His rant was cut off by the sound of a car coming up the drive. Not just a car. Jase's car. Jase was here. No, 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 no. Too many people were already in danger. I didn't need to add another one. He slowed down as he approached the house only to speed up again when Xander's father turned to face him, raising his gun. The click of the trigger made me act without thinking. I lunged at the man in an attempt to stop him from shooting Jase. Unfortunately, I tripped over Daisy and landed flat on my face as the car screeched to a halt. The gun went off and a storm of cursing ensued. So much cursing. By the time I got up, Jase was out of the car and the man was on the ground with Jase's foot on him. Thankfully, the gun was in Jase's hand. Jase saved us. Tell me you're okay, Jase yelled out to me as I pushed myself up on my knees. I wasn't okay. My face was wet with what I suspected to be blood, my left eye was not fully opening, and my knee was on fire. But given all that could have happened, I was better than I might have been. I'm fine. I tried to stand but failed as a siren echoed in the air, getting closer by the second. Did you call the sheriff? I pushed myself up again, this time making it to my feet. Based on the gasp that reached my ears, I looked at least as awful as I felt. August, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. Xander ran to me from the barn. Stay back, I yelled at the same time his father shouted at him that it was all his fault, every last thing. I told you to leave. Sheriff Martin appeared and immediately started in on Jase as he climbed out of his car. Wait, there wasn't just one extra car. There were two. Doc was here. But why? How? Good thing he came. He saved our lives. Xander sidled up to me and handed me his hoodie. I used it to stop the flow of blood. Dad's drunk and, you're not my kid, you vile thing. The man was cut off, yelping in pain. If I were to guess, it was because Jase added a little bit of extra pressure to his spine. Good. Pipe down, Clarence. Doc brushed past the man and went straight over to Jase. I called the sheriff because I could hear things getting out of hand, and Jase wasn't even here yet. But how did you? I thought back to the call I'd placed to Doc. Maybe he did answer after all. He held up his phone. You never responded when I answered. That doesn't explain why he has a gun. One of our citizens is on the ground, and August's face looks like that. The sheriff didn't seem pleased by any of this, but Doc, then I, explained the situation, including how Daisy inadvertently saved the day by tripping me just a second ahead of the gun going off. This right, Clarence? It's all bullshit. They kidnapped the boy. I was saving his good ass and look how I get repaid. The sheriff held his hand out for the gun, and Jase reluctantly handed it to him then released the man from his foothold as a second cruiser drove up the drive. Deputy Ron. Thank fuck. I didn't know why, but things felt like they might be okay now. The boy? Doc said knowingly. Not your boy. That vermin's not mine. His mother, the whore, went to hunt the bastard down. Turns out he died in the sandbox, which was a better way to go than I was gonna give him. Evil. The man was pure evil. Xander leaned into me, his body shaking. Poor thing just learned his dad was not his dad, which even though he was horrible, had to sting. And 30 seconds later, he learned his biological father died serving our country and that the father he had grown up with had planned to murder him. That was a lot to take in. Sounds like I need to bring you in, Clarence. You know, rules. The sheriff gave me a pointed look. And you need to follow me and make a statement, both of you. Shit, all of you. Great, I'm gonna miss supper because of stupid domestic bullshit. He held the door open for Clarence to climb in the back seat of his cruiser with no cuffs or anything. He would probably walk out of the jail just as quickly as he walked in. Come with me, kid. Sheriff Martin pointed for Xander to climb in the back with his dad. Fuck that. Sheriff, I heard the call. Sheriff Martin's head snapped in the direction of his deputy. Figured I could help. Looks like you got your hands full with Clarence. I can deal with the boy. I need to check him over, Doc insisted. And August too. You know, rules. He parroted the man's previous excuse for taking in Clarence. I'll call Claire and schedule court for the morning. I didn't know who Claire was, but she was suddenly one of my favorite people. The sheriff looked back and forth between Doc and Deputy Ron and scowled. Doc had been right, this was all about power to the man, and with two men giving him no way out but to do what they suggested, he was not pleased. He spit on the ground and nodded to Xander, who ran to Doc. Sheriff Martin climbed in his car, turning behind him to say something to Clarence, and then he took off. Thanks, Ron. I owe ya. Doc nodded his head in the man's direction. You do. I was just about to get a full stack from the diner. It was so close, sitting there in the window, waiting for Lila to bring it my way. Apparently, Doc had called him and asked him to come. Interesting. You owe me breakfast. He walked back to his car, stopping long enough to add, with real syrup. How's about lunch? Doc asked him. Looks like I got court in the morning. Yeah, that's good. I'll be there. Deputy Ron and Doc seemed to be saying more without any words before he finally got in his cruiser and took off. I climbed into Doc's car with Jase following behind us in his. I wanted to ride with him to find out what he was doing here and to tell him I missed him, but Xander was scared and asked me to drive with him, so I did. When I finally looked in a mirror, I was relieved to see my face wasn't as awful as I originally thought. Doc cleaned me up pretty quickly with Jase hovering in the background, his eyes never leaving me, all protective like. I took that as a good sign that he wasn't back because he forgot something, but maybe he was back for me. He and Doc had a little whisper session while I promised Xander I would take care of Boxer and meet them in the morning. I had a sneaking suspicion Doc had something to do with Jase being back. I didn't care why. As long as he was back. Please let him be staying.
Chapter 23, Jase. With the gunshot and subsequent activity, Augie and I didn't get a chance to talk. At all. When he said he wanted to ride with Doc, I chalked it up to him wanting to be there for Xander. The poor kid had been through a lot in a short period of time, and he was probably in at least a minor state of shock. While Doc looked over Augie, I sat with Xander in the waiting room. So, you okay? He took in a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, I knew that already. Knew what? That he's not my dad. My mom told me a long time ago. I just didn't have anyone else to be my dad, so I pretended he was. My heart broke as I wrapped my arm around his shoulders and pulled him against my side. Yeah, I didn't get a great family either, but there's good news. There is? He looked at me with big eyes and so much hope I couldn't disappoint this kid. What good news? Well, now you get a new family. Someone who wants to be your dad, and you always have me and August too. Anytime you need family, we'll be here for you. He flung his little arms around me and squeezed as hard as he could. Thanks, Jase. I want you to be my family now. I held him tightly, holding back my own tears. I want that too, kid. On the drive back to the farm, Augie and I still didn't really talk. It was almost awkward but not quite. Something felt tense between us, and I was starting to wonder if coming back was a mistake. Maybe Augie didn't want me back in his life. He seemed happy when he first saw me, but that could have been because a drunk man was pointing a gun at his head. He might have been just as happy to see the mailman at that point. When we arrived at the house, I got out and followed Augie into the barn to feed the animals, but I couldn't handle the silence any longer, so I stopped at the door and reached for his arm, stopping him too. Are you mad that I'm back? Augie pursed his lips and gave a slight shake of his head. No, but, why are you back, Jase? You basically said I'd never see you again. I threw my head back and took a deep breath. These words weren't easy to say out loud, but I couldn't hold them in any longer. You're my mate, August. And I'm yours. Your mate. Augie swayed on his feet, so I pulled him up against my chest and held him tightly. He felt so good in my arms, exactly where he belonged. His scent was a little off, and when I held him tightly, his body felt different too. But I figured it was just because I hadn't held him in so long. Being gone for 2 weeks probably wouldn't sound like a long time for most people, but for me, it was an eternity. I've missed you so much, August. Me too. He rubbed his eyes on my shirt and looked up at me. So, you're staying? I leaned down and kissed him, loving how he tasted on my lips. 2 weeks was way too long. I could never leave him again. For as long as you'll have me. His eyes glittered with moisture, but he pulled away and grabbed the hose. Let's get finished up in here so we can get inside. I have some updates for you. Updates? I glanced around the barn, looking for repairs that might have happened while I was gone. Nothing looked different or new. Are these good updates or bad? Augie's back was facing me, but I could still see his lungs inflate with a deep breath. I hope you think they're good. Well, that's not cryptic. He glanced over his shoulder and smirked. Just get the work done so we can go in and talk. By the time Augie finally sat down at the dining table with a cup of tea, I couldn't wait any longer. Okay, spill it. I know something's up and the suspense is killing me. He swallowed a big gulp, then lowered his mug and folded his hands on the table. I'm not sure how to say this, so I'm just going to jump right to the chase. Please do. Before I have an aneurysm over here. He stared right at me and dropped the biggest bomb I'd ever heard. I'm pregnant. My jaw dropped as I processed his words. Just 2 little words that changed my whole world. You are. He smiled and shrugged one shoulder. Yeah, I guess we weren't as careful as we thought. I stood up and closed the distance between us. Augie looked unsure until I picked him up and twirled him around in the small kitchen. We're having a baby. Me and you. I laughed at how amazing that sounded. For real. For real. August chuckled and wrapped his legs around my waist. And I'm so fucking happy you're back. I didn't want to do this without you, Jase. I was already walking toward the bedroom so we could finish our conversation without any annoying clothes between us. You never have to do anything without me, August. I was stupid and selfish, but I'm back and we're gonna be a family. His lips covered mine in a heated kiss as I lowered him onto his bed from muscle memory. The room was dark, but I didn't need light to love him. My body knew exactly what we both needed. I love you, August. And I want to make love to you. He was already shimmying out of his jeans before I could fully release my grip on him. Yes, Jase. Mate. That word falling from his lips was the sexiest sound I'd ever heard. My cock was rock hard and threatening to pop through my jeans if I didn't get inside him fast. I wanted to take my time and remind him how precious he was to me. Love him as my mate and the father of my child, but I couldn't help myself. My alpha side was in charge and needed to not my mate, officially claim him in a way that we were both actively aware of. I'd always known my connection to Augie was special, fated, even, but when I pushed into his hole this time, the intensity of that connection was more powerful than ever before. I wasn't sure if it was his pregnancy hormones or my alpha instincts, but his channel gripped and caressed my cock in a way that didn't even seem humanly possible. Then again, I wasn't fully human, and now that August was carrying my child, a part of him wasn't entirely human either. I rocked in and out of him at a variable pace. Sometimes hard and fast, sometimes slow and gentle, trying to drag out the impending tidal wave of pleasure I knew was coming when I nodded August for the first time. I wasn't even sure how he was able to get pregnant without my nod in the first place. It was rare but not impossible, which just proved how special he was. How special we were together. When I was finally unable to hold on any longer, I reached for his cock and stroked him at the same pace I thrust into him, but in the opposite direction. I knew from experience that sensation of fucking and being fucked was heady, and I could tell by the way Augie's eyes drifted shut, he was enjoying it too. Come for me, baby. I teased his slit with my fingertip, then reached down to play with his balls before starting up my stroking again. I want to feel you around me. Yes, Jase. His whole body moved with me as he let go of all his inhibitions and just allowed himself to feel. I'm there. As he said the words, streams of thick cream shot out of him, coating my hand and his belly. I pressed in as hard as I could and unloaded inside him, still coaxing the final drops of his offering out while I deposited my seed within him, my knot sealing us together so deliciously, as I bit into his shoulder, marking him as mine for always. I love you, Augie. I repeated the words again because I realized I liked saying them. I didn't need any kind of reciprocation or promises back from August. I just really wanted him to know how I felt. How I'd always feel. Apparently, he felt the same way. I love you too, Jase. Please don't ever leave us again.
Chapter 24, August. Many months later. Coming. The door felt like it was a mile away as I waddled, yes, freaking waddled, my way there. I was officially the size of a house and hated to even look at myself. Jase didn't have the same affliction. He was constantly staring at me with that smile, the one that said he wanted to strip me from head to toe and make me call out his name as he filled me with his knot. The man was insatiable. I loved it. I reached the back door and saw Doc standing there with Xander. Both of them were smiling, but Xander's face was a little bit apprehensive. Doc had been awarded temporary custody when things with his father went from bad to worse, or really better, depending on how you looked at it. His father relinquished his rights without too much fuss because Xander wasn't biologically his. I couldn't imagine how Xander had to feel about being rejected so completely by the man he had always thought to be his father, no matter how horrible the man was. At least he was with Doc now. I couldn't think of a better person to have on his side. "What's up, Doc?" I giggled at my own joke. Xander here has been feeling off, and I sensed something I hadn't before, so I did some. I'm a shifter. For real. I think I'm gonna be a fierce lion or maybe a tiger, I don't even know. Can you believe it? His apprehension was gone and the boy was bouncing on the balls of his feet. What he said. Doc chuckled, musing the boy's hair. I thought maybe he could have his first shift here. Doc's place was on the river, which was perfect for his otter but probably ideal for Xander if he was a larger animal. Congrats. Jase came up behind me. But you know it's still cool if you're something smaller. Your, Doc is a badass otter, and they aren't huge. You might even be a rabbit. I leaned back against Jase and winked at Xander. They're my favorite. No way. You didn't give my bunny away? He stared at me in shock. You're my bunny? I squeezed Jase's arms around my waist. Nope. Jase is my bunny. I turned in his arms to kiss his cheek before leaving to get some tea and cookies. It's what Grams would have wanted, and I had nothing valuable to contribute to the first shift conversation. I had everything set out on the table just as Daisy came running past them, nearly knocking Xander down. Tea's ready, I called, and a minute later, they all sat down and filled me in on so many shifter things my head was spinning. I needed to learn, though, especially given that Doc was 99% sure my little one would be a shifter. By the time they had laid it all out, I wasn't sure I totally followed the logic, but I got the gist of it. So the plan is you guys will shift and try to help him with his first shift? Here, tonight? They all bobbed their heads. Then I best get baking. I pushed myself up and pressed one hand against my back to relieve some pressure. Chocolate or vanilla, or are you a strawberry man? I looked at Xander and waited for him to respond. He didn't, so I had to give him a nudge. For your cake. You can't have a first shift without a cake, it's like a shifter birthday. You would make me a cake? Any kind you want. I might have to run to the general store, but between Grams's old cookbooks and YouTube, I could put something together. I saw a cake once that had candy in the middle. Can you do that? His eyes opened wide. What kind of candy? I had no idea how to do it, but I would figure it out. M&Ms, please. Well, at least those baked well. Done. I spent the next few hours baking as Doc and Jase talked Xander through what to expect. As soon as the sun began to set, the three of them walked out into the back field to have their first run. They asked me to go with them, but this felt like a private moment for them to share. It wasn't hard to see the apprehension growing in Xander, and he didn't need someone just watching them. So, I promised I'd be waiting for them on the porch, ready to serve them cake when they were done. My poor cake was lopsided and held together with frosting, but there was a secret compartment of candy in it just as requested. When I showed it to Xander, he looked at it like it was the best thing he ever saw. I sat on the rocker, watching them walk around the barn. Lux was on the rail, Daisy was by my feet, and Henrietta was on the steps. I rocked, holding my belly and loving the feel of our little guy's kicks every now and then. "Are you going to be a gymnast or get your black belt?" I spoke in a sing-song voice as he pressed against my hand. Henrietta climbed off the steps and waddled away, and Daisy followed her, which was odd for them. I wiggled my way out of the rocker and followed them to see what was up. My grin grew wide as an otter, and a bunny came around the barn, followed by another bunny. Xander was a bunny. I hurried to meet them. "Look at you. You're a glorious bunny, just like Jase." The memory of Jase telling me about his family and how they wanted no part of his recessive gene had me vowing to make Xander feel like a king for being the hoppy little furball he now was. "Don't tell Doc, but they're my favorite," I shouted. The otter grunted at me and did a little hop of his own. Okay. I laughed as I bent down to scratch Xander's head. "Otters are cool too. Now go finish your run and come back for cake before I can't control my pregnancy cravings and eat it all gone." They took off as I went back into the house, checking the animals on my way. By the time I reached the steps, all 3 people were there, their clothing a mess and their shoes in hand. "Now, how about that cake?" Jase leaned in and kissed my cheek. I specifically heard mention of cake. "There's most definitely cake." We went inside and ate and laughed, and carried on like a real family. It was exactly what I'd always wanted. By the time we had to say goodbye, we had eaten the entire cake. "I haven't felt like I was in a pack since, I can't remember how long," Jase confessed as we watched the taillights disappear into the night. "Not since my first shift, and maybe not even before that. Tonight felt like I was back in a pack." "I'm glad our little one will have a pack even if it isn't what you grew up with. Especially since it isn't what I grew up with." He hugged me from behind. "You know what shifting does to me?" He whispered in my ear, his erection hard against my ass. "Oh, I remember, it's my favorite part." I turned in his arms and kissed him soundly before leading him to our bedroom. There were definite benefits to being mated to a bunny, that was for sure. Epilogue. August. It's time. I set the bucket on the hook and slowly exhaled. The animals were fed and ready for the day, and it was getting to the point that hiding my contractions from Jase was impossible. I still wasn't sure how I'd gotten away with it for so long. I hadn't been too quiet with the last couple, but then again, he was preoccupied with building the new pen for our incoming cow. Strangely, the new cow was also named Daisy, so that was going to be fun. "Grilled cheese?" Jase asked, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Not for lunch, silly mate. It's time to meet our baby." He dropped the hammer he was holding, narrowly missing his foot. "Baby? Now?" He scooped me in his arms and started running out of the barn. "Put me down. I weigh a ton." I don't know why I even bothered. When he got like this, it was best to roll with it. He walked in the direction of our new minivan because, apparently, I was that dad. "I need to shower. I've been mucking out stalls." He cussed under his breath as he changed directions. Damn it, what kind of a mate am I? I should have been doing that. "You're the amazing mate who was getting the barn ready for yet another animal because I felt bad for the little bugger." If a 1,500-pound beast could be considered little. "How long have you known?" He reached the screen door and finally set me down to move Daisy out of the way. It had become her new favorite place to sleep, and it was a pain in the ass. A contraction began to build, this one definitely stronger than the last, or maybe it felt stronger because I was just standing and not working. In any case, it sucked. "Shit. Forget the shower. Let's get you to Doc's." He set the pig back down and went to scoop me up again, but I swatted his hands away. "No. I need to get the animal grossness off me, and you do too. Just call Doc. I'm sure he'll come over. Jase huffed, but he begrudgingly agreed, and by the time I stepped out of the shower, Doc was already waiting with Xander in tow. Xander was technically old enough to be left on his own, and he could more than handle it, but Doc still took him most places with him. And I got it. Xander's father was still in town and couldn't be trusted to leave the kid alone. Although, at the rate he was drinking, I doubted he'd be a problem for long. I brought Xander, Doc explained. He offered to take care of the animals. Xander nodded like a little bobblehead. He loved animals, and if I were to guess, a job as a vet was in his future. Thank you. I appreciate it. Jase took him out back to show him what to do, or more accurately, make up shit for him to do, while Doc did a quick check of my progress. How far apart? Doc asked as I stood there in my bathrobe. I knew it wasn't worth putting any clothing on. 5 minutes. I still had plenty of time. I read all the books and way too much random stuff on the internet. It was part of the reason I kept working instead of heading in early. I've still got time. Doc's arm wrapped around my shoulders and he smiled. You have time if your wee one isn't a shifter. But since that's probably not the case, time is not on your side. He gave me a half squeeze. So how about we get your room ready for this delivery? Time is not on your side. What the heck did that mean? 5 minutes later, when Jase came running in as I screamed in agony, I got my answer. Get in the shower. I could barely force out the words as he came in, but the smell of the barn was almost too much for me to take. Were you rolling around in the stalls? Jase looked at me, then to Doc, then to me again. Looks like your baby is a shifter and your mate's senses are on overload, so you better get your ass in that shower or you'll miss the birth of your son. Jase took off like a flash toward the bathroom. I cried out in pain again, unable to ask Doc if I was going to be stuck with this horribly powerful sense of smell forever. One contraction after another began rolling in. I didn't even have time to catch my breath between them. Doc didn't seem too concerned about it, but then again, he wasn't the one who was about to evict a human. Jase, you might want to come out now, he called as he grabbed a towel off the dresser. When did that get there? He stood at the foot of the bed and carefully folded it up. I'm just going to place this here. I'm back. Jase took my hand and kissed my cheek. I cleaned myself raw. I doubted that, but I appreciated him not being pissed that I yelled at him like a weirdo. Although, he was the reason I was there in the first place. Another contraction rolled through me hard and fast. The books lied. I couldn't handle this. No one could. You're just in time, Doc smiled at us both. He was so freaking calm. Next one is when it's time to push, August. You're doing great. I'm so tired, I whimpered, not sure I could last any longer. Jase held my hand tightly. You've got this, baby. You're the strongest man I know. Push. Doc commanded just as the pressure began to build for my next contraction. This time, it hit me so hard I couldn't even scream. The burning as I pushed was almost unbearable as both men told me to keep pushing, as if I had any other option. I pushed until I heard a pop, or maybe it was a tear. I wasn't sure what it was. Then my ears filled with the most glorious sound I'd ever heard before. The sound of crying. My baby was crying. Our baby was crying. Congratulations. Doc held the baby up with the umbilical cord still intact. The baby was covered in yuck, and yet it was still the most beautiful being I ever saw. Only it wasn't a boy. Looks like I was wrong. Doc shrugged and set her on my chest. You have a perfect baby girl. Do you have a name? No. We have a boy's name. I spoke at the same time Jase did. Angeline. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow. She's an Angeline if I ever saw one. My eyes filled with tears at the sight of our beautiful baby girl and hearing my mate, my true love, instantly honoring my Grams without a thought. She is Angeline, Doc agreed. I can see it in her eyes already. Hello, sweet Angeline. I'm your daddy, and this is your father, and we've been waiting for you a long time. I looked down at her face, overwhelmed by the love I felt for her. This is Doc. He's sort of your uncle, and pretty soon, you're going to meet your cousin Xander. You're going to love him. He's a bunny just like your father, and the two of them get in so much trouble together. One time, Jase clarified. One time we ate your daddy's flowers. Jase cut the cord, and Doc cleaned up Angeline before handing her back to me for her first meal. I'm going to give you guys a minute alone so I can let Xander know all is well. Then we'll hang out in the kitchen and eat some cookies. Are there cookies? It wouldn't be Angeline's home without them. I made a point of always having them handy as my little tribute to Grams, as silly as it was. We have a baby. Jase beamed down at us. Thank you for making me a father and giving me something I never thought I would have, a family that loved me for me. Thank you for coming into my life and helping me see that this is where I belonged, and for giving me our beautiful baby girl. What should we do with our boy name? He teased. Oh no. Nice try, mister. Next baby we have, you're giving birth to. I was such a liar. We had our son the following year, and another the year after that, and another daughter the year after that, because you know, bunnies. Next in the series. Sometimes love arrives with a purr. Omega cat shifter Leo needs to get out of city life. He's sick of people trying to rescue him when he shifts. He's no domesticated animal, he's a cat shifter descended from lions for goodness sake. If only he hadn't been saddled with a recessive gene that made him the least fierce of his clan, and sent him running to the big city. A city he now loathed. It seemed that a move to the country was in order. Alpha human Ron loves his job as the deputy of Riverview Township, even with his annoying boss, but he needs more out of life than just his career. If only he had figured that out sooner, back when he still turned a few heads. Now he was just the deputy and no one looked at him as a potential anything. Ron's life is turned completely upside down when Leo moves to town, taking over a fixer-upper that was barely standing. There's just something about Leo that has him wanting to both protect and help him. Feline the Love is a sweet with naughty heat M/M shifter M preg romance featuring a cat who finds more in Riverview Township than just a new home, a human who discovers there's an entire world he never knew about, a real estate bargain that very much isn't one, two men who finally find their place in the world, true fated love, and an adorable little baby. This is the second book in the River's Edge Shifters series brought to you by the co-writing team of Lorelei M. Hart and Aria Grace and can be read as a standalone. If you love naughty fun, true love, and you're M preg with Hart, one click today. Listen now.